É um prazer enorme estar aqui com vocês. Na verdade, é uma situação agridoce aqui para mim hoje. Doce, mais uma vez, a gente ter Damodaran com a gente aqui na nossa Annual Conference. Mostrar tudo que a gente fez nesse ano, realmente, para mim, tem um gosto aí da melhor sobremesa. Mas tem uma parte agria aí que eu vou deixar para o final. Pensando um pouco na agenda, aqui, que deve tomar muito tempo, eu estou tendo problema técnico aqui para minha apresentação, mas uma hora passa aqui. Eu acho importante, pelo momento que a gente está vivendo, a gente entender o porquê que a gente está aqui. Né? Muitas vezes, e aí eu estou falando até do passado, quando eu virei charterholder, a gente pensava na society, né, como sempre, e a parte mais visível, que é aqui esse evento. Né? É legal, a gente tem coquetel, pinot grigio, né? Paulista, né? Tomar um pinot grigio, né? Mas a gente tem aqui uma razão de existir, né? E é isso que a gente é muito alinhado com o CFA Institute. E vocês podem ver bem que a gente está aqui para liderar a profissão de investimento. E pensam sempre no que a gente está olhando ali. A gente vai liderar na ética. Eu acho que essa é a parte mais importante por tudo que a gente está vivendo no Brasil. A gente abre o Valor Econômico todo dia e tem uma notícia difícil, né? Então, um compromisso nosso, a nossa razão de existir é para liderar a profissão. E é uma responsabilidade de cada um de vocês. A Society ela é feita pelos membros, ela é basicamente rodada, a gente tem um staff brilhante, mas é rodada por muitos dos voluntários, e são sempre nossas decisões no dia a dia que vão fazer a nossa reputação. Então, acho que vocês têm que ler, e vocês vão ver que isso no nosso escritório está escrito numa parede bem grande, para todo dia a gente lembrar. Né? Assim, acho que a gente ser um motor aqui de mudança. Né? Então, eu fico feliz de ouvir, e não sei se já contei para alguns de vocês, mas que, inclusive, alguns dos nossos membros se recusaram no passado a seguir uma rota menos positiva e depois foram reconhecidos por isso. Né? Então, acho que isso tem que ser uma história que a gente tem que ver cada dia mais, a gente elevando a barra. Tá? E aí, gente, pensando um pouco de nós, né, eu fico muito feliz de ver esse gráfico, né, porque quer dizer que a gente está aumentando a nossa presença. Né? Então, a gente vem crescendo de forma vertiginosa. Se a gente pensar hoje, o Brasil, a CFA Society Brasil, ela é maior do que todas as outras societies da América Latina. Hoje somos 1.811 membros. Então, se a gente coletivamente vive a nossa missão, a gente, de fato, tem uma capacidade de fazer impacto. Então, contando também um pouco, para quem não tem participado dos nossos eventos, a gente gosta sempre de dar esse raio-x, né, de onde que a gente está. Então, a gente vem cada dia mais tendo uma presença no Brasil. Né? Obviamente, São Paulo e Rio, a gente está falando de 85% da society, mas a gente vê outros estados também tendo uma presença. Né? E é legal a gente ver que os grupos estão se organizando nos outros estados. Né? Então, a gente viu esse ano, nasceu um grupo no Espírito Santo, um grupo em Florianópolis, a gente está vendo grupos em Curitiba que fazem um encontro ali, e acho que a gente vai fortalecendo a nossa comunidade. Né? A gente ainda tem uma dificuldade de se ver de fato como uma comunidade, mas a gente, diferente, por exemplo, do MBA, né, onde que tem esse Alumni Association, que é muito forte, que busca ajudar um ao outro. Mas eu acho que cada vez mais esse tipo de evento não tem que ser aqui para vir ver uma palestra e ir embora. Aproveitem, né? No final, a gente vai ter uma oportunidade de networking, e eu acho que isso tem um valor inestimável. Né? Porque se você for pensar para parar, o que cada um de nós está fazendo, você vai ver que a gente tem várias pessoas em diferentes funções. Então, se você quer hoje, como algumas pessoas me procuram, quero fazer uma mudança de carreira, o que eu posso fazer? Está aqui, o que cada um de nós estamos fazendo. Né? Então, pensar, hoje eu sou um investment strategist, eventualmente você ser um portfolio manager pode ser algo que faça sentido. Né? Assim, a gente tem hoje 17% da society nessa posição, então são pessoas que você tem a oportunidade de trocar ideia, eventualmente pessoas que sabem de oportunidades nessa posição. Né? E aí, se a gente pega hoje o mercado que os nossos charterholders estão atuando, obviamente a gente olha aqui que 52% está ali entre equity e renda fixa. Né? Mas, de novo, não é só isso. Né? Eu, por exemplo, sou um exemplo, claro, né, eu resolvi ir para a economia real. Tenho mais uma board member que resolveu também fazer essa transição agora e está indo para a economia real, e acho que é onde também a gente tem visto alguma presença nossa, né? Então acho que é super bacana a gente usar desse network, né? A gente vê valor nisso, de possibilidades aqui de mudar de setor, de posição. E aí, pensando em organizações, quando a gente olha no globo, hoje o número mais recente que eu tenho somos 220 mil charterholders no mundo. Então, cara, basicamente todo o país tem pelo menos um charterholder, né? E hoje a gente tem esses nomes como os maiores empregadores, né? Então são lugares onde que você, sendo um CFA charterholder, você tem valor. São instituições que veem valor em tudo que você conseguiu atingir nessa jornada aí de 3 anos ou mais de estudo, né? E aí quando a gente vem para o Brasil, esses são hoje os maiores empregadores que a gente tem aqui. Então, muito orgulho aí de ver que todo mundo que vê aqui o porquê de contratar um charterholder. E é especial, eu tive um prazer enorme de estar com a Ana em Baltimore esse ano, porque a gente como comunidade, por tudo que a gente tem feito, a gente tem sido reconhecido, né? Então, eu comecei aqui minha presidência em setembro. Para quem não sabe, nosso fiscal year é de setembro a agosto, né? Então, logo que a gente começou, a gente tem encontros regionais, encontros globais com as outras societies no mundo para troca de melhores práticas. E aí a gente teve o grande prazer de, em Baltimore, esse ano, ser reconhecido como uma Outstanding Society. A Ray, que é a Managing Director do CFA Instituto, entregou para a gente esse troféu, né? Então é muito orgulho de ver que a gente está no caminho correto, né? Então, mas, de novo, a gente depende muito de vocês, né? Da call for volunteers, da gente ter voluntários engajados, voluntários que estão aqui querendo fazer a diferença para a society em si, mas também para o benefício da sociedade, né? E aí eu realmente não quero tomar muito tempo, eu só tenho mais 50 slides, mas dar um overview rápido aqui também do que a gente fez nas diferentes caixinhas que a gente tem aqui dentro da society, né? Então a gente fala credentialing, basicamente isso, a gente está contando o que eu estou fazendo para atrair novos charterholders, né? E tem alguns programas que a gente tem bastante orgulho de estar fazendo hoje, né? Então o primeiro deles é You Win, né? Que basicamente a gente está movimentando aqui para aumentar a nossa diversidade, né? Se você for pegar aqui, eu peço as mulheres aqui que se puderem levantar a mão, só para ver. Podem olhar, pelo que eu tinha de número, aqui reflete basicamente nossa society, né? São 10%, tinha 30 mulheres inscritas para um evento hoje, que aqui são 300 pessoas, né? E a gente não fica feliz com isso, e esse programa é uma porta de entrada para o mercado financeiro, né? Então a gente dá um curso para universitárias, depois a gente faz um esforço enorme para que elas tenham um estágio, e aí com isso elas ingressem, né? E a gente tem sido muito feliz, né? A Márcia está aqui, que ajudou a fazer isso dar certo. A gente fica muito feliz de ver que a gente tem tido uma retenção muito grande, né? O número que eu tenho é, sei lá, 95, 98% de retenção das meninas que passam pelo programa, né? Então é esse push que às vezes precisa, né? De dar essa força para elas, né? Outro programa aqui, a Dani aqui do nosso board também capitaneou, é o Research Challenge, onde a gente tem uma competição de grupos de universitários que a gente seleciona todo ano uma empresa onde que eles fazem uma análise e depois eles fazem uma competição entre si, e aí tem um vencedor local, ele depois vai para uma etapa regional e eventualmente até para uma etapa global, né? Então esse ano a gente teve a FGV como campeã, mas é isso, né? É dar esse flavor um pouco de mercado financeiro para eles, né? Nossa, a gente já está na 20ª edição aqui do Research Challenge, realmente é algo que a gente faz com muito carinho, né? E aí, por fim, também uma parte de benefício da sociedade é ajudar colocaria aqui dos underprivileged, né? Então a gente fez uma parceria com a Junior Achievement e também fizemos um acordo recentemente que me dá muito orgulho, com o consórcio do Cristo Sustentável, onde que a gente já fez uma turma para mães solo, né, de educação financeira. Então, nessa ideia da gente trazer, de fato, conhecimento, né? Assim, a gente está ali próximo, usar de tudo que a gente, muitas vezes, que somos privilegiados, levar e dividir um pouco do nosso conhecimento, né? falando sobre advocacy, que também é uma área onde, que para mim, ela é super relevante, mas que às vezes fica pouco visível. Aqui a gente busca estar bem próximo do regulador, e aí de forma que ele não seja capturado, que a gente possa trazer aqui melhores práticas. Então, esse canal que a gente tem com as outras societies do mundo, com o CFA Institute, a gente quer trazer isso para dentro do Brasil. Então, por exemplo, a gente é muito próximo da CVM, a gente tem um orgulho enorme de todo ano organizar um evento que é o aniversário, CVM no final do ano, e a gente faz isso junto com a AMEC, e ali virou uma praxe de que ela divulga a agenda regulatória do próximo ano. Então é super bacana que a gente está ali com eles, a gente tem a oportunidade de expressar nossas opiniões. Então, para quem gosta de temas e quer contribuir, a gente frequentemente faz call for volunteers para diferentes consultas públicas que a CVM está fazendo. Então, aqui só uma foto que a gente tem com o Otto, que é o atual presidente, com o Fábio Coelho, que é o presidente da AMEC, mas aqui falando um pouco das consultas públicas que a gente trabalhou. Então, teve de crowdfunding, teve também da parte de regime informacional, de fundos de imobiliários. Então, a gente quer cada dia mais ter essa capacidade de estar junto com o regulador, influenciando e levando ele para um mercado simétrico, um mercado que está trabalhando para a sociedade. Aqui, a Ana trabalha bastante junto com a MEC ali no Código Brasileiro de Stewardship, também é uma coisa que a gente investe bastante energia, em fazer algo que é importante para a gente, para garantir essa qualidade do nosso mercado de capitais. E aí, por fim, também, falando de mundo, a gente tem tentado reunir a comunidade daqueles que falam português, E eu lembrei, Cabo Verde virou, acho que depois da Copa agora, a gente lembrou que eles falam português, que é um país que existe, mas até lá a gente tem charterholder, então a gente tem juntado bastante para fazer alguns eventos e essa troca de experiências. E aí, todo esse nosso movimento tem também aberto é difícil, aberto espaço na mídia para a gente ser vocal e buscar que as pessoas escutem a nossa mensagem. Então, valor, a gente abriu espaço para a gente falar um pouco. A gente teve também a Ana falando no broadcast sobre as nossas iniciativas relacionadas a mulheres. Então, a gente quer cada vez mais estar tendo essa oportunidade de passar a nossa mensagem. E aí, por fim, a gente fala um pouco de member value. Esse ano, para quem acompanhou mais a Society, e eu avisei aqui, há muito tempo atrás eu venho avisando sobre a Annual Conference, que a gente ia ter um speaker de alto calibre. Então, eu falo sempre, fiquem de olho na Society. Somos 1.800 membros, só se a gente for fazer, sei lá, no Morumbi, para ter todo mundo. Então, é difícil hoje ter um lugar onde que a gente consiga acomodar todo mundo. Então, a gente tem hoje esse trade-off de que é limitado o espaço. Então, vocês podem ver, a gente tem feito muito evento com speakers realmente de alto calibre. Então, eu não vou passar por todos aqui, mas tivemos o CEO da Vinci Compass, tivemos um de distress muito legal. Aqui tivemos o Petit Journal falando com a gente. Lá em Porto Alegre, a gente teve o Galó. Sei que para quem não conhece, ele realmente é uma lenda. Ele fez uma revolução na Renner. A Renner é hoje o que atribuo muito a ele. Então, a gente tem essa possibilidade, às vezes, de chamar essas pessoas, elas vêm de graça e com prazer para falar para a gente. Então, essa é a potência que a gente tem como CFA Society. Então, a gente vem fazendo bastante coisa, então, e não só São Paulo e Rio, mas tentando Brasília, tentando Porto Alegre. Então, a gente já fez no Nordeste, já fez em várias outras praças para a gente realmente estender a nossa mensagem a outros lugares. Aí, eu acho que vai ser um pouquinho do tema também. A primeira vez que a gente está vendo, como eu estou usando aqui o white collar, tendo potencial de ser disrupted, Então, a gente está vendo a inteligência artificial vindo aí dentro do nosso mercado. Acho que hoje Damodaran vai falar um pouco de Artificial Intelligence, right? Então, mas a gente já teve um evento bem legal aqui sobre o tema. Também tivemos o diretor-presidente da Sicredi. Então, isso são só algumas coisas. E a gente finaliza aqui, acho que em grande estilo, o nosso ano. Então, essa parte muito bacana, realmente é um prazer enorme estar com isso. Mas eu ganhei bastante cabelo branco e a minha barba virou branca aqui, né? Quando eu olho no espelho, eu quase não me reconheço com essa grande conquista que a gente teve esse ano, que foi o nosso escritório. Para quem não conheceu, eu convido, a casa é de vocês. A gente quer ver um retorno alto sobre tudo que a gente investiu. Então, a gente tem um espaço aqui na Fidêncio Ramos 195, espaço maravilhoso. Quer fazer uma reunião, quer fazer um call e quer um lugar mais reservado, você é de fora, precisa de um lugar de suporte, ali está aberto para vocês, tá? Então, aqui é um pouco de fotos do nosso espaço. Então, a gente tem um lugar ali para fazer cursos, temos buscado fazer alguns eventos lá dentro. Então, usem e abusem, como diria a CEA, né? Então, mas aqui é a CFA Society, usem e abusem do espaço e a gente quer ver ideias, né? Se tiverem ideias para usar também, acho que são super bem-vindas, tá? Um ano também de novos patrocinadores, né? Estamos super felizes aí com a Principal e a Boyden se juntando a nós, né? A Principal veio muito bacana, trazendo speakers de alto calibre também. Então, quem teve lá, eu estive nesse evento onde eles trouxeram uma Global Portfolio Manager para contar um pouco dela, visão mundo, super bacana. E a Boyden, vou contar um pouquinho, mas é um privilégio enorme ter tido eles junto com a gente para achar o nosso Executive Director, alguém que a gente está muito entusiasmado aí para dar o próximo passo aqui na Society, né? Recentemente, tivemos aí a chamada para os novos conselheiros. Aqui começa um pouco da parte agri do evento hoje para mim. Então, hoje, esse é o nosso board. Tá? Então, eu queria pedir só para os board members levantarem, por gentileza, só para vocês saberem quem são. Infelizmente, a gente não consegue, mas dá um aplauso aí para eles. Eu falo por conta própria que a gente equilibrar trabalho, família, CFA Society não é fácil, assim. Então, a gente dedica bastante, mas a gente acredita na missão, né? E aí, naquela da gente ser um exemplo da melhor governança, a gente tem algo aqui que é um staggered board. Então, nossos mandatos no board são de 3+3. Então, o máximo que uma pessoa pode ficar aqui dentro do board são 6 anos. E aí, com muita dor, mas com alegria de tudo que a gente fez, eu, a Ruth e o Flávio não está hoje aqui com a gente, mas a gente agora se despede do board, mas estamos muito felizes aí com a seleção dos 3 novos, também Lucas, Marina e Bruno. Se vocês puderem levantar aí, a gente dá uma receptividade aí para eles. Então, que vocês venham aí com muita energia para a gente continuar subindo a barra e fazendo cada vez mais, né? E tudo isso, apesar da gente ter aqui muitos voluntários, não seria possível também sem nosso staff. Acho que eles estão lá atrás, mas também eu tenho o Anand, se você puder levantar, o Anand é nosso novo Executive Director. Eles merecem mais que tudo, né? A Nádia e a Nayara estão lá atrás, mas merecem mais que tudo. Realmente muito aplauso aí por toda a dedicação. Teve dias e dias. Nayara e Nádia esse ano foram baita parceiras para a gente fazer tudo que a gente fez. Realmente não foi trivial. E aí, o Anand vem agora com essa grande missão de organizar a casa. A gente fala que para fora está bonito, a gente tem algumas coisinhas aqui, uns housekeepings aqui que se ele está ficando, eu estou ficando muito feliz. Eu ainda estou considerando que ele não correu na primeira semana, então estou feliz que ele está aceitando a missão aí. Mas, enfim, acho que temos tudo para dar o próximo salto aqui da Society, né? A gente me dói porque, assim, tinha muito projeto, tem muita ideia boa, mas a gente precisa de gente para executar, né? Então, quando a gente olha os novos board members, o que eu falo é isso: dediquem, assim, para a gente poder destravar todo o potencial, né? A gente tem muitos membros, às vezes a gente precisa fazer as coisas acontecerem, né? Botar a mão na massa e sujar a mão mesmo, né? Então, por fim, queria agradecer a confiança aí durante 6 anos. É um prazer enorme. Foi um prazer, ou está sendo, né? Meu café está esfriando, como a Márcia falava bem, está bem frio o café. Então, foi um prazer enorme. Mas eu vou passar por aqui. Fiz em 20 minutos, como eu prometi. And with that, I'll switch to English. And I would like to invite to the stage Damodaran. I could talk about his resume, but I told him that I would say that it's very nice to see that he's been taking some time off to take care of his beautiful goddaughter. So the stage is all yours.
Thank you. Thanks. I own only one suit, and I wear it only to funerals and my kids' weddings. And that is, I do it under duress, because my wife says, if I don't do it, it'll be my funeral instead. But I extracted a condition that at my funeral, that I don't get dressed in a suit. Right? The other is I haven't, in 40 years of traveling, ever checked baggage on. It's always carry on. What I'm trying to say, it's day 5 of my trip, and if you notice wrinkles in my pants, it's because it's been stuffed into the carry-on baggage now for 5 days. So, but tomorrow I'm going to be in jeans and a T-shirt. I've given up on my clothes. As I thought about today, how many of you were in my 2024 corporate life cycle session? Okay. Were any of you in my 2017 narrative and numbers session? Now, just as a background, I came to Brazil for the first time in 1997. And Anna is actually the only person I've run into who was actually at that session. It was in Rio. It was organized by IBMEC. And between 1997 and 2017, I think I came to Brazil every single year. Right? So in many ways, I can see changes in Brazil that you probably don't notice because you're here all the time. Okay? This afternoon I was describing the nature of Brazil. It's either the end of the world or you're a developed market, right? It's like watching a bipolar, and sometimes I've got to talk people off the ledge saying, you don't notice how much has changed in the last 27 or 30 years, close to it, because I get to come here once every year, once every 2 years. So I see the changes perhaps better. I remember the Brazil I came to in 1997. Trust me, it's a very different country. So as I thought about topics for today, I thought about the fact that I've been doing a lot of podcasts this year because I have nothing to do. I sit around at home, and after I come back, I say, okay, a podcast. I usually do that from 7 to 8 California time in the morning, partly because I've discovered that by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, my brain is fried, so I can't even make sense. So I say first hour in the morning, and then I go off to look after my granddaughter for the rest of the day. And I counted that I've done 29 podcasts this year. And the podcasts all start with different topics. And every single podcast eventually pivots to AI. So whatever the topic, AI becomes the end story. Do you even remember a word where we didn't talk about AI? It's like AI has taken over every single conversation. Corporate finance, in business, in investing, in academia. You'd be amazed at how many meetings faculty are having in dealing with AI at every... They're not even talking about AI in business. They're talking about the fact that their students are using ChatGPT and tests are not working anymore because AI has made it too easy to cheat. So what you're going to see in today's presentation is a collection of thoughts I've accumulated over AI. And here's how I'm going to structure it. For the first 15 minutes, I'm not going to talk about AI, but I'm going to set the table. And the question I want to address is AI a revolutionary change, or is it just a buzzword that'll pass on? So what's the difference? How do you tell the difference? And one of the few advantages of getting old is I've seen this movie before. I've lived through major changes. I tell people I did my first valuation with a pencil, an eraser, a ledger sheet, and a calculator. 1981. So I saw how personal computers changed the world. Then in the 1990s, I saw the internet change the world. Revolutionary change. And then, of course, in this century, we've had smartphones and social media. The question is AI like the PC, like the internet, or is it like the metaverse, which came and went, and I have no idea what it even was, right? And let's face it, markets have had all these things that claim to be revolutionary, but you look back 5 years later, that wasn't much. So I want to start with that discussion of how do you tell the difference between something that is really going to make a big change and something that's passing. Then I'm going to follow up by laying out what happens to us as a people, as consumers, as investors, when big change is coming. I'm going to talk about what I call the big market delusion. It's a post I wrote almost 15 years ago about something completely different, about social media and advertising. And I want to talk about what happens, and it's almost, and it's a feature, not a bug. We complain about it, what happens when big change is coming. And then I want to start on AI. What the heck is AI? I mean, for many people, AI was born on November 30th of 2022. What happened that day? That was the day ChatGPT was opened up to But I'm going to argue that AI is a culmination of forces that have been building for the last 4 decades. Let's talk about where AI is in that process. And along the way, I want to also then talk about the business of AI. Now, you think, oh, that must be a well-established discussion. I mean, after all, how much did the Mag 7 or the Mag 5 that are the big investors, what, $600 billion in AI capex? There must be a business driving these decisions, right? It's a remarkably opaque process because nobody seems to know, including the people spending hundreds of billions of dollars, what exactly the AI business is. So at the risk of grave personal damage, I'm going to try structuring the discussion of AI as a business. I don't know the answers. Nobody does. Mark Zuckerberg doesn't. Elon Musk doesn't. They might act like they do. But I think we need to start discussing AI as a business. What is it as a business? What are the business economics? Because you're going to spend $1.5 trillion. I mean, the way I describe AI architecture is we're building the most expensive factory in history. And the only problem is we have no idea what we're going to make in that factory. And that's a scary place to be, right? Now, you can believe in AI, you can not believe in AI, but I think we need to examine the business economics of AI because that's the only way to judge. Is this AI capex too much? Is it just right? Because otherwise it becomes a he said, she said, right? There's a lot of potential, there isn't any potential. Let's start to lay the foundations for a business discussion of AI. And maybe that'll help you the next time somebody, an AI advocate or an AI pessimist comes in and says, this is terrible or this is amazing, you can bring it to those business questions. And the last 25 minutes or so of this session, you're willing to stay until about, 11 or so? I'll keep going and going if need be. I want to talk about the personal threat of AI. Now, this year, there were at least five university graduations where the graduation speaker was booed, which is very difficult to get, right? I mean, graduation, people are happy. Usually they don't boo. You know what those 5 graduation speakers shared in common? They all talked about AI. And here's why they got booed. The way we talk about the AI threat is we talk about how AI is coming after your job. What if I told you that AI can do what a CFA does and that none of you will be necessary in 5 years. This is not exactly a great message to deliver, right? But let's face it, each of you in the back of your head is saying, is there a Claude bot out there or a Claude agent out there that can do what I do? But rather than talk about that threat you might face, I want to talk about that threat I face. And for me, the threat is real. There are 5 bots out there with my name on it. None of them are developed by me. 2, I know the people developing the bot. I've given them everything they ask for. I give them feedback. I have no official connections to it. But the other 3 are unofficial, and I'm leave it at that. Okay? And they all claim to be able to do what I do. I want to talk about what those bots can do as well as I can. And I think there are some things there. What those bots can do better than I can. And there are some things I do where, let's face it, that bot is going to do a better job. And what I can hope to do, and this might be just delusional on my part, that my bots can't do yet. Keyword is yet. For those of you thinking AI is some machine learning and that if you're just, you're a human being, you're smarter than the machine, let that go. This isn't machine learning circa 2006. Difference between machine learning, which is just computers running with stuff, and AI is almost sentient. It's kind of scary. What AI is trained to do is make decisions based on incomplete information, using what it's learned by looking at what humans do with incomplete information. That's what the data feeds it, right? As a banker, what did you do when this set of scenarios came in, and it builds it in? So I know this race is going to get more and more difficult for me to run because my bots are going to get better, and I'm 69 years old. Okay, so basically, there's only so much I can run. But there will be parts, I think, where I hope to hold on. As I do that part, what I want you to think about is your own jobs and act like there's a bot looking over your shoulder. And the question you got to ask is, what do I do that my bot cannot do? So lots on the agenda. Let's start with the word, right? For the last 4 or 5 years, the entire market has been driven by AI. The most successful company in terms of adding market cap over the last 5 years has been NVIDIA. And NVIDIA's entire rise came from supplying one of the big parts. I talked about AI, the architecture being a huge factory. NVIDIA provides the chips that run that factory. And along the way, every company seems to have put an AI component into what they do. Even if it doesn't fit, right? And are you surprised? Remember in the late 90s, every company was a .com company? Cementcompany.com. I'm not sure what that even means. The cement is going to be delivered online? No. But they knew that if they added .com to their names, the market liked it and pushed their price, and that's become a factor. There's a whole surge of capital going into AI, venture capital going into AI startups. And the scary part is there's venture debt or private credit going into AI as well. So money is flowing in, everybody's excited about it. And along the way, the question that is this just all hype? Because there is that possibility. Or is this real? So let's start that process by drawing the contrast between revolutionary change that has a huge impact, and incremental change, which kind of comes and goes. I mean, if you look at the basis for what makes something revolutionary, the first is the staying power. It's not here and gone. The second is it reaches across businesses. That's why I was never excited about the metaverse. Remember when Facebook pushed the metaverse? I said, I don't even know what you're talking about. Because to me, the metaverse is 25-year-old geeks wearing virtual glasses, playing in virtual lands, right? I mean, is that the metaverse? In which case, there is a segment, but this is not market-wide. Truly revolutionary change cuts across sectors. And truly revolutionary change is not just with businesses. It changes the way we live and work. So let me take the 4 disruptions I've lived through personally, because I can talk about the experience, and talk about how they played out. These, to me, are revolutionary changes. The first is personal computers. The second is the internet. The third is smartphones. And the fourth is social media. With every one of these, if you look at the business effects, new businesses were created around that disruption. PCs, Microsoft, Dell, remember that whole, all the personal computer companies. There were other companies that were supposed to be stars that are now dead and gone. That's the other thing to remember. You get companies come up, they succeed, and they move on. At the same time, let's not forget what I call the dark side. As these companies came up, there were other companies that got disrupted. We tend to forget that revolutionary change has guillotines, right? I mean, the French Revolution, people's heads got cut off. In this case, there are businesses that get their heads cut off. So there are businesses that get disrupted. Remington used to be a typewriter maker. Where are they now? Who knows? Now, does anybody make a typewriter anymore? And for most of the other companies, if you don't count the new entrants and the disruptors, this becomes a cost. Something in their operating expenses. So if you're a banker, you buy personal computers, it's an expense. If you're the internet, you're paying for the service. So for most companies, the effect of the disruption shows up as a cost item that replaces another way that they used to do this. But there's a personal effect. Every one of these disruptions created new demands, new workforces. Okay? At the same time, there were other people who lost jobs. And that's something I want you to keep in mind as part of the story. So when I hear an AI optimist talk about how Claude bots are going to change the world, I say, okay, let me play along with you. Let's assume that Claude bots can do everything that bankers and CFAs and lawyers can do. There's a dark side there, right? Bankers are going to get laid off, lawyers are going to get laid off, CFAs are going to become redundant. What are they going to do instead? Right? And if you look at job losses, every one of these revolutionary changes has created job losses. That's the threat of AI. And it changes the way we live and work. When was the last time you were in a travel agent's office? I remember a time when to go to Brazil, I had to go to a travel agent's office. It would be this dark, dank little spaces, and there'd be a person in front of a computer. They wouldn't let you look at the computer. It's secret information. Or you want to fly to Brazil, and they'd click some buttons and pull up flights. They wouldn't let you see them. I found the cheapest flight for you. I said, thank you, thank you. You had no idea they got the cheapest flight. And I will also get you a hotel at a good price. Okay, thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you. Every revolutionary change permeates into the way we work and live. That's a question you have to ask. Is AI going to be like those changes, or is it going to be close to the metaverse? And you can already start to make your judgments on it. So if you look at these revolutionary changes, as I said, the dark side should not be forgotten. So as people talk about investing in the promise of AI, they need to also think about the companies that are going to be left in the debris because of this. And perhaps a better investing strategy is sell short on those companies rather than go after the companies that are going to benefit. So let's talk a little bit about what happens when revolutionary change is on the horizon. Let's play a game. Let's assume that you see a big market out there. Big market could be China. It could be social media. It could be the internet. It could be PCs. You see a big market out there. Lots of potential, but it's out there. Let's say you're an entrepreneur, right? So the big market basically it's hundreds of billions of dollars. We're not talking about a niche market. And there's a promise that if you succeed in this market, you could make a lot of money. One human emotion that is a constant across cultures and across time is greed. Greed is a good emotion because that's what lets you try to do things. So when you see this, you're saying, I can do it. So what's the next step? If you're a greedy person and you think you can play in that market, you say, I'm going to start a business. You're an entrepreneur. And there, you say, I wouldn't do that. And that's actually true. Not everybody who looks at a big market says, I'm going to start a business. It's a subset of people. If you know any entrepreneurs, I'm going to ask you kind of a generic question. Do entrepreneurs tend to be diffident people or overconfident people? Almost by definition, you got to be overconfident, right? You think you will pull it off, so you got an overconfident entrepreneur. The overconfident entrepreneur needs capital to get started, right? So overconfidence is a key part of the story. You got an overconfident entrepreneur, you start a business. Who do you go seek capital from? Venture capitalists. Let me ask you the question about venture capitalists. They tend to be diffident people or overconfident people. They think they can pick winners, right? There's a selection bias here. Those people you hated in high school, remember the know-it-alls who really didn't know very much? They're the ones starting businesses. And the people supplying to them capital are the even more arrogant ones in high school who basically, with the football stars, who basically walked around school and said, I don't need to study, I'm going to be a star. So you got an overconfident entrepreneur who's being fed capital by overconfident. It's a little pod, right, of overconfident people feeding off each other. And this is repeated in 100 other pods in Silicon Valley, if you want, or whatever startup place is. Each pod thinks it is the pod. Each pod thinks it is going to be. You see where this is going, right? So within each, so if you think of these each as businesses, small companies, and you walked in, they're confident. They're beyond confident. They're going to be winners. And how does that show up? When they project out what they will make as revenues, because they are overconfident, each pod overestimates its revenues. They overestimate their values. They're being completely rational in their minds because they don't think of them. Overconfident people don't think they're overconfident. Right? That's the definition of overconfident. They think they're right. They think they're going to. And that bias gets worse when you have a really big market because the potential essentially feeds into the overconfidence. And now comes the third part of the story. So you've got a big market, you've got overconfident entrepreneurs and VCs. You're saying, how the heck are they pricing their pods? Because the market is out there, they have nothing tangible. I do a session on pricing versus valuation. Some of you might be familiar with it. 95% of what passes for valuation out there is pricing. What's the difference between pricing and valuation? What's the value, if you haven't forgotten all 3 levels of your CFA already, what drives the value of an asset? Cash flows, growth, and risk, right? We can dance around this. We can call it a DCF. We can measure the risk with the beta or not measure the beta. As this is as old as time, right? Cash flows, growth, and risk. That's what drives value. So to value something, you got to understand the business, you got to estimate cash flows, you got to adjust for risk, and you come up with the value. I'd love to tell you that's what bankers do, and that's what but that's not the case. They price things. How do you price something? I don't know how many of you own your apartments or own your houses? The rest of you rent? Oh, okay. I want to, so if you think about, if you didn't inherit your house or your apartment and you bought it, think about how that process played out, right? You went to that nice neighborhood in Sao Paulo, you found exactly the apartment you wanted, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. You have no children, you're not even married, but you need the extra 2 bedrooms. Don't ask me why. And then you say, how much would it cost me to buy the apartment? The realtor names a number, right? What did she do? Run into the bathroom, do a discounted cash flow valuation of the apartment? No, she based it on what other people are paying for similar apartments. She might have adjusted for the fact that you're on the 12th floor with a nice view. I will add a little 10%. How did she come up with the 10%? She just made it up. Real estate is a pricing game. I always laugh when people say, I've done a discounted cash flow valuation of my real estate. No, stop playing that game. Real estate is pricing all the time. Demand and supply. And what other people are. You're seeing those unsophisticated realtors. Take a look at a sell-side equity. How many of you are sell-side equity research analysts? Sell-side equity research, I've always wondered why there's even a DCF in a sell-side report, right? It's a pricing game. What's your job description? You're a sell-side analyst. How many companies do you cover? 20. And what's your mission? What are you told? List buys, sells, and holds, right? It's a relative. You're not asking, is this company cheap? You're saying, is this company cheap relative to these other 19 companies? You have a pricing mission. I completely understand that you use PE ratios, EV to EBITDA, you might invent multiples as you go along, because you need to price companies. So if you have overconfident owners and overconfident or venture capitalists and founders, they price the company. And how do they price it? By looking at what other overconfident people are pricing their companies at. And already you can see that the overconfidence is going to get built into the pricing of every company. So that's the big market delusion. Overconfident founder, overconfident VC, you get all of these companies. If you add up what these companies will have to deliver as revenues based on their pricing, by definition, what's going to be true? The collective revenues you get from looking across the companies will be greater than the actual market size. So it's not that people are wrong about the judgment on the total market, they're just wrong about their capacity to win that market. So when somebody says, these Mag 7 companies, they're smart, they're run by brilliant people, they must know what they're doing, right? When they spend $800 billion or $1 trillion in AI capex. Let me give you another hypothesis. Do smart people tend to also often be more overconfident people, especially when you look at the top of tech companies? I'll wager every one of these companies thinks it's going to be the winner. Alphabet, Meta. They're behaving rationally given that expectation. The only problem is collectively they can't all win. And the end game is you're going to end up with a number great in the market. So when you look at these big market stories, here's what they'll have in common. First is, anytime you ask any of these people, why is your company worth what it is? They're never going to talk business economics, right? Because that's not why they price the company. They're going to tell you how big the market is going to be. Second, if you ask them, what about the competition? They won't even talk about it because overconfident people think there's really no competition. They are the winners. All of the story will be about how quickly they can grow. And it's on revenues, with almost no attention paid to business economics. If you don't believe me, pick any AI company that you know of, where you know the founder. Ask them, why do you think you're a valuable company? It's almost always going to come to AI is going to be a big market, and we're going to be able to grow revenues. How do you plan to make money? I haven't thought about that yet. But we'll figure it out. That's no way to run a business, but you can see the pieces come in. So one way to see how big the big market delusion is about 10 years ago. I took online advertising. At that time, it was a big market. I took every publicly traded company in the online advertising space, starting with the two biggest ones, Facebook and Google, or Alphabet and Meta, as you prefer to call them. And what I did was I took the market cap of every company and reverse engineered how much revenue you'd need to get to it's just pure math, right? So if you know that Anthropic is going to be priced at $2 trillion, which is what the latest number I saw floated around, to have a $2 trillion market cap, let's work it out, we're CFAs. To have a $2 trillion market cap, roughly how much would you need to generate? So let's say your cost to capital is maybe 10%, right? So the number, so you can do the math in your head. Roughly how much would you need to generate as after-tax operating income every year for $2 trillion to be a justifiable market cap? Would 20 billion do it? If you have 20 billion after-tax operating income and you have 2 trillion, you're looking at what? 1%? You would need $200 billion in after-tax operating income. You get there. You're saying, what about growth? All of that can create noise, 200 billion. To get 200 billion in after-tax operating income, how much should you need in pre-tax operating income? What's the tax rate? Now, in Brazil, it's 34%. The US, it's 25%. Let's use 25% as our tax rate. Let's even make it 20%. Maybe these companies will figure out a way to pay less in taxes. So you'd need about 280 billion in pre-tax operating income. 280 billion pre-tax operating income, you'd have to ask, what revenues would I need to get to that pre-tax operating income? Let's give these companies 20% operating margins. That's 1.4 trillion in revenues that Anthropic would have to make on an annual basis just to break even. This isn't even for you to make money. And if you take Anthropic at 2 trillion, XAI, that's part of SpaceX, at $1 trillion, and you add on OpenAI at $1.5 trillion, and then you ask what are the collective, who's buying all this stuff? Your break-even revenues collectively for these companies to justify their market cap would have to be 10, 12, 15 trillion. And this is why I want to make this a business question. How big can the potential revenues for AI be? Because that's going to tell you how big the bubble is and what the correction would need to be to get it back to steady state. So the big market delusion essentially will play out in markets as prices going up collectively. Because initially, investors have no check, right, on the pricing. There's no numbers coming out. It's all potential, all promise. But there's a bar mitzvah moment coming. Familiar with bar mitzvahs, which is the Jewish, you're now a grown-up. So think of these companies in the bubble as being 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds. You can say, I'm going to play soccer for Brazil. And you say, okay, you can do it. In your head, you're saying this is 0.001% chance. But you don't say that, right? But there is that moment when the numbers start to come in. And for AI, it's starting to happen. Where's the revenue? You told us about potential, but nothing seems to be happening yet. And at that time, markets have to clean up. They have to correct. We call this a bubble, a boom, and a bust. And if you ask regulators or government or even investors what they think about bubbles, is it a positive or a negative? Almost everybody says bubbles are bad. We got to stop bubbles. We got to create rules and Be careful what you wish for. Because bubbles are a feature of markets, and they reflect the human capacity to overreach. And every time human beings overreach, there's a correction, but it changes the way we live. It's like the dot-com boom and bust, right? Did it change the way we live? Absolutely. PCs, there was a boom and bust, a smaller one, and again, it changed the way we live. And social media, God help us, has changed the way we do pretty much everything. And when people say, I hate bubbles, I say, okay. Do you want to live in a world run by actuaries? How much money do you think actuaries would be investing in AI capex? Nothing. Not because they need to see tangible evidence. The fact is, if they don't build the factory, nothing will get produced. They will never get. I tell people, look, if we lived in a world run by actuaries, we'd still be in caves. They'd be checking this fire stuff out for like 5,000 years. We have to look at every possible thing that can go wrong. One of these days, I will let you out of the cave. Markets create change, but they come with chaos. You don't like one, don't ask for the other. I remember the last time I was in Singapore about 2 years ago. I was eating my lunch, and I was teaching the class, so I was trying to get my lunch eaten before I could get back. And this gentleman stops by and he says, I head the Singapore Stock Exchange. And I have a question for you. And I said, can I finish my lunch? And he said, okay, you can eat your lunch. And he said, we in Singapore, our stock markets, we're losing market share to Hong Kong. Our markets are not vibrant. They're not. And he said, what should we do? And I said, I can tell you what you should do, but you won't like it. He said, you want your markets to be exciting and attract people, you got to live with a lot of chaos. And you know what Singapore thinks about chaos? This is a city built on order. It's like Disneyland on steroids, right? No. Everything works. Chaos is the last thing. And he said, we don't like chaos in Singapore. And I said, that's why you're losing market share to Hong Kong. They love chaos. They'll be okay with it. So, as I've made this trip to Latin America, the constant theme in every country is, our markets are so illiquid. Maybe not so much in Brazil, but Colombia and Peru. How do we make them more liquid? I said, hey, live with some chaos. You live with chaos on your political front. Why not invite it into your markets as well and let the whole thing, because this is a feature of markets. You can't just take the good stuff and reject the bad stuff. It's a package deal. So keep that big market delusion, because it is definitely happening in AI. We can debate how big the correction will be, but it's going to happen because it always does. And it's not because people are being short-term or irrational. It's because the overconfidence that leads people to jump across will always create the correction. So let's turn our attention to AI. I see stuff passing my desk with an AI name on it that I saw 10 years ago. I saw there's this company in Israel that's created software that does fair value accounting. I saw it in like 2014. I saw the same product last year. It's now called an AI product. So the point I'm making is, much as we like to think that AI is a recent phenomenon, it's a coming together of two forces. One is more powerful computers in smaller packages. I still, in my NYU office, which I visit only like 4 months a year, have my first Mac 128K, my first Apple computer, bought in the early 80s. And the Mac 128K did not come with a hard drive. It had a floppy disk. You inserted the program disk, you typed your document, then this was a very tricky moment. You'd have to eject the program disk and put in another disk to save the file. Say, please, God, don't disappear off my screen. My smartwatch is 25 times more powerful. My Apple Watch is more powerful than the 128K computer that I had. That's how much power in computing is shifted. So that's one big trend. And who's benefited from the trend? Chip companies early on was the Intels of the world, now so basically this computing power. There's a second force, though, that's married to that computing power, which is our access to data has exploded, starting with the internet. Somebody remind me again, what exactly was the internet? What was that, that it happened within your lifetime and mine. For most of us, it was the early 90s. What exactly was the internet? Were there mainframe computers before the 90s? Sure. Every entity, NYU had one, Harvard had one, companies each had their own computers. You know what the internet did? It's an amazing innovation. They just connected computers. That's all the internet was. So now when I got on my NYU computer, I had access not just to the NYU computer, but every university connected to the internet. So it effectively meant that you were sharing data across every computer on the face of the earth. So your data access exploded. So you had more data. And in this century, we've added to that quantitative data that was already in the computer, qualitative data. Like what? You know what? Apple probably knows, if you have an Apple device, how many coffees you had today, how many Uber rides you took and where you went. And all of this stuff is being saved on a computer somewhere, whether it's with Amazon or Apple. So you got computing power and big data, and it's the two coming together that creates AI. The rest is just architecture and mechanics. It's ironic that ChatGPT, which is really low-tech AI, is what tipped the scales, right? And I can see why. What do we say revolutionary change does? It changes the way we work and live. I knew that AI was different from the metaverse, all these incremental things, when my wife, who teaches 5th grade, came home 2 months after ChatGPT was unveiled and said, my students are cheating. They're using ChatGPT to do their homework. I mean, this has changed. It's percolated to a 5th grade classroom. And this is playing out in businesses and settings all over. So is it revolutionary change? I think so. I don't think it's a question of, so this is not the metaverse. So somebody who says, this is all hype, it'll pass. Usually they're 70 years old with a flip phone, and everything is already passed by them already. This is not a passing fancy. This is real, and we need to talk about it seriously. We can't just wave it away and say there's nothing there, right? So if you think about the business of AI, I can break it down to 4 quadrants. There's the architecture, the factory you're building, right? There's the software, and I'll throw the LLMs in there. Think of this as the lubricant in the factory. It's making the factory run. But so far, we're just building the factory, we're feeding it in. The factory has to make stuff that people will buy, right? The products and services coming out of AI. Almost all of the attention and money spent right now has been in the architecture, building the factory. This part, handful of companies are actually making money on AI. Palantir, maybe. What does Palantir do? Scary stuff that you don't want to ask about. You might end up in Guantanamo Bay. Right? But clearly, there are a company that's managed to find an AI variant that actually makes the money. So the next time you hear somebody dumb, Michael Burry has a short sale on Palantir, and he might actually be right, but it is a real company that's one of the few companies. Anthropic, though the evidence is more in Twitter with the anecdotal evidence, clearly seems to be able to, I mean, I think Claude Fable, which was the version of Anthropic that the US government shut down for a couple of weeks, its estimate costs $6,000 an hour to run Claude Fable. So if you're a company that uses Claude Fable, it's an incredibly expensive product. And you're saying, Anthropic must be making a lot of money. I'll come to that. But it's still, if you take all of the revenues that companies make from the product and service part, right now you'd be lucky to get to 200 billion or 250 billion. The architecture is up there, 1.5 trillion, but this isn't after-tax operating income. This is the revenue, right? They're not making any income. Now, of course, they'll tell you, this is early, it's going to become 2.5 trillion, 25 trillion, and I'll show you what Goldman Sachs estimated as the total addressable market for XAI, the SpaceX part. It was 22 trillion. I can't even, the trillion is such a difficult word to use, right? It is just so big. 22 trillion. I'll talk about what I think about that number, but, you know, so if you think about this, and I think there is this side benefit. Data is going to become potentially a business of its own, especially if it's proprietary data. So as you look at the business of AI evolve, you know, and the winners right now are primarily the hardware, the architecture players. It's NVIDIA, it's the companies building the data, it's the power companies that supply the data centers. The factory is being built and people are making money on the building of the factory. But the value proposition is completely opaque right now. We don't know what the factory will make, and that's really the question, and I want to examine when I look at the business front. On the software front, now, to the extent that AI is computing meeting with big data, there needs to be software connecting the two because this doesn't happen magically. So presumably there'll be people who make money from selling the software. And among the companies that collect data, you know, the payoff to using AI, and I'll make this prediction, will be greatest if they're using proprietary data. Right? If it's general data, everybody will have. I mean, I have a saying, if everybody has it, nobody has it. And that's something to think about because when I talk to companies, they say, AI will make us more productive. Okay? Let's go along. It'll make you more productive. It'll also make us more profitable. Not so fast. Because if you become more productive by using an AI product that somebody sold you, let's say Claude sells a grocery store agent. And if grocery stores use it, they can cut the cost of inventory by 10%. So this is the upbeat story, right? You think this is good. If I cut the costs by 10%, I should be making more money. Econ 101. What's the next question you need to ask? Is Anthropic selling the same product to every other grocery store in the mix? And if they do, what's going to happen? Every company's costs are going to come down by 10%. And one or two things will happen. One is that they will have to lower prices, in which case we will benefit as consumers. Maybe that's the productivity payoff. It's not as profits, but as consumers. Or the second is you keep your prices high, and you lose your market share entirely to the other players who take it out. Which effectively means if you're telling me you're going to become more profitable and valuable from AI products, I need to see some proprietary data feeding into those powerful machines, which nobody else. So maybe McKinsey could pull this off, right? They have the collective client files of every company they've consulted with over the lifetime. What if they fed it into an Anthropic machine and Claude created a McKinsey AI agent, which does what a consultant does? Let's face it. If you're a consultant, don't take it personally, or do. I don't care. 95% of consulting is cookbook. Right? You turn to a page, you copy that thing, you remember to change the name of the company, hopefully, you know. Hey, you know what? Claude would never mess up on not changing the name. In fact, on my blog post, I deliberately still leave misspellings. Because you'd be amazed how many people say, did you write this or did a bot write it? And I said, that's for me to know and you to find out. No. I said, would an AI bot screw up the way I did in terms of misspelling a word? I hope that gets through, but no. But I think on the AI front, that's a factor. So if I were to make a prediction 10 years from now, let's say AI works out as to what will happen for most companies, AI is just going to become an expense. It's something you pay for. The question is, what is it replacing? If it's just a tool that people use, then it's just an additional expense. That's not good. So for AI, upbeat stories to play out, you know what your end game for AI has to be, right? It's not just a tool. It actually has to replace people. We'll come and talk about the macroeconomic consequences of replacing your best paid white-collar workers with AI agents and how an economy sustains that shock. But that's the setup. Now, of course, if you talk to Dario Amodei, you talk to Sam Altman or Elon Musk, and you ask them, is this going to be good for us? Even they are becoming a little more wary about saying this is going to be great. But here, again, having lived through 4 major disruptions in my lifetime, I remember what I was told at the start of each one. When PCs first came out, you know what they told us? You will have to work less in the office. You used to type stuff on a typewriter. You had to use that cleaning up button when you made a mistake. This is going to save you, and you'll have tools you can use. You'll be able to get your work done in 6 hours, go have 4-day weeks. How did that play out? We ended up working longer than ever, right? Because the computers basically created their own workload, which is different than what you used to do. Not necessarily more exciting, different kind of boring. No. And then you got to the internet. We were told that the internet would make us all smarter. Remember, you said, you can access information on every computer. You'll be so well informed. Yeah, that's worked out really well too. No? And then you get to social media. You watch The Social Network, the movie. And Mark Zuckerberg, and I think he really believed this when he described his idea for Facebook. What was the idea? You can keep in touch with all your friends all over the world. This is going to create this social good, how has that worked out? You now have friends you didn't even know you had, right? Your Facebook friends. Every single thing that tech has sold us, I look back and say, I don't know whether the net effect of that was a plus or a minus. With social media, I think the conclusion we're coming to, it's been a net minus. But there's nothing. Once the genie is out of the bottle, you can't put it back in again. My good friend Jonathan Haidt, who teaches at NYU, has been one of the lead forces trying to remove smartphones from the hands of teenagers, kids below the age of 16. And the reason is the data is accumulating that the levels of depression and suicide, especially among 12 to 14-year-old girls, more than boys, has soared because of social media. Now, I don't want to be, what do they call people who want to go back to the 1830s? But I think I'm not buying this. This is going to be great for you. 20 years from now, assuming AI does what it is, we're going to look back and there'll be some good things that come out of it. Maybe some tasks you did that you can now do in 1/10 the time. There's going to be a whole host of costs that are going to be associated with it. And we have to be ready for that. That's going to be we have to be ready at least in our inner circles. I said, my 3 grandchildren, they're going to live in a world very different from mine, a world filled with, you can ask ChatGPT and there's the answer right there, that's a good news. But the bad news is ChatGPT becomes your therapist and tells your kid to do things they shouldn't be doing. I mean, that's a whole host of cases now that are making their way through the US courts. That's part of the cost. So the bottom line is, I think AI will change the way businesses operate and the way we work and live. That I think is a given. I don't buy into the fact that AI is going to make us more productive, more profitable necessarily. I know that's a pitch right now, because that requires a whole host of other things to happen. And the net effect of AI, I think we're going to see pluses and minuses, and this isn't going to be a decisive win in any way, because I think there are so many things you already start to see with AI that will not go away, potentially could get worse. So for the last year or two, I've been working on a post that, usually my posts are off the top of my head, I just write it and then move on. This AI post I've struggled with because I want to create a structure for thinking about AI as a business. So let me go back. When you build the business narrative for AI, right? First thing we need to do, if we're going to talk about AI as a business, we're going to talk about how big is the market for AI products and services going to be. I don't know the answer, but I'll give you the framework and you can tell me where in the continuum will fall, right? Second stop, you got to tell me if that business becomes whatever size you think, 6 trillion, 8 trillion, what will the players in that business look like? Will it be a splintered business with dozens of players that are different geographically in different sectors? Or is this going to be more of a winner-take-all? Do you see why this is going to matter, right? If you have an 8 trillion revenue and you're going to have only 4 companies that are going to dominate it, that's a very different end game than if you have 80 companies with different kinds of products and services. And along the way, we also have to decide whether that end market is going to be a mass market with low prices and low margins, or is it going to be a premium market, or is it going to be both? And you have to decide how much of the total market is going to be there. Third stop, and this is what I find most lacking in this discussion. How do you make money in business? You sell something, but then you have to produce it to sell it. The difference, you can call it contribution margin, but that difference is what goes in, the unit economics. I told you that Claude Fable, that companies were paying $6,000 an hour to use it, right? And if you stop there, you're saying Anthropic is such a valuable company. You know what it cost Anthropic to deliver that hour of Claude Fable? About $6,000. In what? Water, power. I mean, all of the stuff you see out there is going in. Now, if you ask Anthropic or an AI optimist, what's their pushback going to be? As we get bigger, those costs will go down. And my question is, which one of them? Is power going to get cheaper as you use more of it? That's going to be tough to do. Is water going to get more plentiful because you're building more data centers? In what universe? We're stuck with water and we need it to drink and take showers, and you're cooling data centers with it. There isn't any element this is not like a software business, right? There you can see the economies of scale. As you get bigger, your margins are going to... With AI, and this might be just my ignorance of the space, and I keep pushing back on AI experts. Tell me where the economies of scale are going to come in so this cost comes down. So that's a business economic. And then once you've thought through those 3 steps and you say, these are the players, you got to tell me what sets them apart. What is the competitive advantage? What are the moats in this? I mean, these are questions you ask about any business. Shouldn't we be asking those questions about AI, which is going to be, given the CapEx, potentially one of the largest businesses we have? And finally, if AI continues to play out the way it is, there's going to be a whole lot of pushback coming from outside. Already in the US, building a data center has become this incredibly difficult process to go through because communities don't want these data centers in the middle. In fact, one reason SpaceX is getting a premium pricing is there is a story, and this might be outlandish, of doing, doing what? Of launching data centers into space, because there are no communities to complain then, nobody can sue you, and then using those data. Technologically, you can't do it yet, so I've talked to people and said, can we pull it off? Right now we can't, but who knows, 5 years from now, 7 years from now. But those are the kinds of questions we need to address in terms of what the... So I'm going to go back to basics. Whenever I value a company, I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. There are 3 drivers of cash flows. There's your revenue growth. There's operating margins, you make as profitability, your profitability part of your story, and the reinvestment part of your story. Just because AI is a new business, it's exciting, doesn't mean it has... So the revenue growth that basically you will have will be determined by, what you think the market... So I agree, today the revenues are small, they'll grow. So let's talk about 10 years from now, what those revenues will be. Will they be 2 trillion, 5 trillion, 10 trillion? And I'll at least give you some framework for thinking through that. In terms of margins, the unit economics come into play. That's why you've got to ask, what will happen to the costs? And will the price start to get pushed down if there are other players in the game? Can you still charge $6,000 an hour? And economies of scale in terms of other costs you might have in running the data centers. And for the reinvestment part, this is an exceptionally capital-intensive business. And here's the terrifying part. Will the data centers you build, this is like an automobile assembly line, right? Where you use it for the next 40 years. If technology keeps shifting on you, will those chips that you put in at great expense have to get replaced every 4 years? Which is great for NVIDIA, but not so great for the companies that are producing the products and services. So I don't know the answer, but I'll at least start the process rolling. If you look at the promise of AI, if you look at the most often, their view is that AI will not just be a tool, it'll replace an employee. A world in which McKinsey can fire all their consultants and replace them with AI agents. That's one extreme. At the other extreme, people think it's not just going to be just a tool, but it's a tool that's neat, but you're not going to pay much for it. How many of you have used that AI button in Zoom? When you open Zoom, there's now an AI button. I've never touched it. I'm afraid to even touch it. I don't know what it'll do to me. Will it step in and correct me? But it turns out that it summarizes your Zoom meeting. If you have an Apple device and you upgrade it to the latest operating system and you open Mail, it's got this neat little structure where, because I get 300 emails a day. And this now breaks my emails into a primary email, which is these 20 emails really matter. I actually like it. Because I go to the primary emails first, read the 20 before I go to the long one. Neat. I really think it's neat. But the reason I stop at neat is if Apple says that'll be $5 a month, I'm not paying it. It's not neat enough. And a lot of AI stuff, unfortunately, is neat, but not neat enough to charge a price. I'll make a prediction. 10 years from now, everything you buy will have an AI component. You go to the toilet, you hit the flush button, there'll be an AI flush button, which will automatically decide what needs to get done. And we won't get any further than that, right? It'll become a bidet if that's what you need at the moment. Everything you buy will have an AI button. The question is, will you pay more for that? That's going to determine part of the potential revenue. So I think the truth falls somewhere between it's neat and nobody will pay for it and it's going to replace workers. And the question is, where in that continuum will you fall? And in fact, this is almost a philosophical discussion as well, because this is at the heart of what will it do to the economy if it... let's take you're an AI optimist. You're Dario Amodei. They hire philosophers. Dario Amodei, and I'll say this only, I'm not saying this lightly, reminds me of one of those middle-aged, in the Middle Ages, you had monks who would feel very guilty, and then they would lash themselves. Every time you listen to one of his interviews, he says, AI is amazing. Oh, it's going to be so terrible. Let me go lash myself and tell you all the terrible things that are going to happen. There's a clear sense that if your best case scenario unfolds, we could be looking at potentially an economic catastrophe, right? Because you will now have millions of high-paid workers who not just lose their jobs, but will have no jobs to take. They'll have to become plumbers and electricians. And what banker can fix a plumbing problem, right? That's not in your wheelhouse. In many ways, though, I think we saw this play out on a much smaller scale 30 years ago when Chinese manufacturing took off, right? There was a disruption. Who lost their jobs? Blue-collar workers, factory workers, miners. And I still remember talking to bankers in New York, and they said, what are these guys going to do? They can't find another mine. They can't go. And in one of the more insulting turns of phrase, they say, learn to code. Come on. Telling a 55-year-old steel worker or miner, go learn to code, is the most insulting thing you can say. This German word I love, Schadenfreude. There's a heck of a lot of Schadenfreude coming back at these bankers. Because now, the plumbers and the electricians are the ones most protected. There's not going to be a Claude agent that comes and fixes your plumbing leak. You will still need a plumber. You'll have bankers and consultants now on the receiving end. And I don't blame the plumbers if they say, learn to plumb, right? It is, and the difference here, I think, is the income that is going to get sucked out of the economy when your highest paid workers lose their jobs means there's far less money to spend on. If you're a grocery store, you want people to come and buy your groceries. A retailer, if people have lost their jobs, and these are the people who came in and bought $5,000 or $3,000, it's that H Stern that I walk by in the airport. Nobody's going to be around there, right? Burger King might still survive. There's going to be a whole host of companies that are essentially going to lose their entire consumption base. That's terrifying. So if you're going to go to either end of the spectrum, play it through. Look at the other consequences because that's going to determine the end game. So I'm going to take you back to this. As many of you may know, or maybe you don't, I valued SpaceX 2 weeks before the prospectus. You got a lot of pushback, right? There were no financials in the company. And the question I was asked was, how can you value a company without financials? And as a company like SpaceX, what exactly are you going to learn in the financials? That they don't have much in revenues, they're losing a lot of money, they're investing huge amounts. I know that already. And then 2 weeks later, when the prospectus came out, it turned out that everything you could have predicted was there. Low revenues. And of course, for those of you not familiar with SpaceX, it's in 3 businesses. It's it's a true futuristic company. It's not a social media, it's not an app company. Its first business is the space launch business. And what gives SpaceX, those of you who don't know the history of SpaceX, it was founded 6 months before Tesla. It's older than Tesla in chronological time. And it was founded, people laughed. Because until SpaceX came along, how did you launch things into space? Either NASA, the government, or you use Boeing and Northrop Grumman for just the military part of launches, very limited launches. So when SpaceX came along, they said, what do you know about the space business? We have all the best scientists, we know. And much as you might dislike Elon Musk for his other faults, this guy thinks out of the box. And over the next 7 years, SpaceX revolutionized the space launch business by doing what? Until SpaceX came along, you know how we launched satellites into space? We built a very expensive rocket. We put the satellite on top of the rocket. We launched the rocket. And after the satellite detached, the rocket blew up. It's a very expensive way to do business. So, Musk is rumored to have asked, why can't we use a rocket that we can reuse? And he was surrounded with people who said, you can't do that. And he said, it's not been done yet, but why can't we do that? For 7 years, SpaceX worked on that tech. For the first 7 years, they had no revenues. 2008, they launched the Falcon, which is this reusable rocket, and it gave them an immense cost advantage. It cost SpaceX 1/3 what it cost their next best competitor to launch a satellite. It's a business where they have a competitive advantage, but it's a business constrained by the fact, are any of you planning to launch satellites into space on your own? It's not exactly a business with there aren't that many people. So the end market is a relatively small one. Even if you're an optimist, maybe 200 billion, and even if you gave SpaceX 80% of that market, it's only 160 billion. You see, what do you mean only 160 billion? When you're being priced at 2 trillion, 160 billion doesn't do it for you. But there's a second business SpaceX has, which is an even better business. Because they have an advantage in launching satellites, about 2012 or 13, they said, hey, we can launch thousands of satellites and use it to deliver internet service. When I flew from San Diego to Houston, I was in a United flight, and most of the United flights in the US now have Starlink, right? And it's like being at home. It's, it's 400, 500 meg. It's a fast service. When I flew from Bogota to Lima, I was on Avianca, and I made the mistake of actually paying for their Wi-Fi. I think I spent the entire flight trying to get on the Wi-Fi. It was so slow that it wouldn't even connect. So already you can see a potential market, right? The technology for delivering Wi-Fi on trains and planes is primitive. It's stuck like 30 years ago. So Starlink has a potential market there. But I'm going to ask a question for each of you. Does everybody here have internet service at home? Let me ask you, does anybody not have internet service at home? In which case you wouldn't be at the seminar, because that's the only way you could have found out about it, right? Now, do any of you have Starlink internet for your home use? Okay. And why did you pick Starlink? Okay, so you use it as a backup. For most of us, though, if you're in a place like Sao Paulo, it's getting your internet through broadband or cable, you get better, faster service. Right now, satellite-based internet service is about 40% to 50% the speed. The internet service business is a big one. If you add the telecom, it's about 1.7 trillion. But most of that is off limits right now because it's not economical for Starlink to compete against them. But you can see an upbeat story you could tell about internet service from satellites improving, and it's an insanely great unit economics business. You see why? Once you got the satellites up, I sign him up. I sell you. I won't ask you how much you pay for Starlink internet, but the money you pay is like pure profit. And unlike a telecom company, there's no cable guy who has to come to your house where you have to stay at home for the whole day. And he comes in and strings cables around. It's like 1990s in terms of what he does. It's a great business. So the second bit. But if you just stop there, you have a great company, but you have about a $500 billion company, even with an upbeat story. And as you know, it was priced at 1.8 trillion. See, where's the extra value coming from? 2 months before SpaceX went public, it was merged with another Musk entity, which was Grok XAI. So XAI is the third business. And this business has the largest potential market. It's all of the stuff we've talked about. So in the prospectus, this was the most fascinating part, is what investment bankers thought about the size I was interested. Goldman Sachs, what did they? Because I wanted to get some sense of how did they, how are they coming up with this market? What are they? And the number they gave for the total addressable market for XAI was $22.7 trillion. I was actually on CNBC the day the prospectus came out, and I said, half jokingly, but maybe it's not a joke, that maybe Grok wrote the prospectus. you know how LLMs have this tendency to hallucinate? Because this looks like a hallucination. 22 point, what do you, just pull the number out of your rear end? You're saying, how do you know it's too big? Let's take the scenario where AI replaces every single worker in the US. I have the number on how much companies collectively paid workers in the US in 2025. It's about 11.7 trillion. So even if you replace every worker with an AI agent, your market gets leveled off at 11.7 trillion. Where's the extra 10 trillion plus coming from? They just made the crap up. And this is not, they're not alone. Every tech company that's gone public, this TAM as they call it, there must be some guy in Silicon Valley who sells TAMs, come in here, I'll give you 5 trillion more in TAM. You want 10 trillion? They've realized that if you put a big number on your total addressable market, people stop asking questions because it's a big market. They should be worth a lot. When Uber went public, what business is Uber in fundamentally? The car service, food delivery. You know what they estimated the total addressable market to be? 5.2 trillion. You know how they came up with the 5.2 trillion? They added up that everything everybody spent on transportation and put in they took what people paid for cars. They also put what you paid for public transit. Basically, they just wanted a big number. They kept adding stuff until they got to 5.2 trillion. Complete fiction again. Because no matter how great Uber is as a company, there is no way in God's good earth that they're ever going to get 5.2 trillion. When Airbnb went public, they estimated their total addressable market to be 3.3 trillion. The promise, collectively, every hotel in the world put together at 660 billion in revenues that year. Where's the extra stuff coming from? So there's gaming going on. And I think that we got to look past the gaming. So that when Anthropic's prospectus comes out, I just want to see, I'm expecting to see a total addressable market of 300 trillion, which is twice the collective revenue of every publicly traded company in the world. And who knows? Maybe they will be selling to Martians and SpaceX will become part of the story. But those numbers are going to be absurdly high. So a few months ago, I sat down and I said, let's play out the different stories. This was right after this outfit called Citrini created a panic in the market because they said AI is going to be so disruptive that's going to destroy the software business. They went through a list of businesses, and the day after the Citrini report came out, the market dropped about 7%, all those businesses. So I said, okay, let's play this out. Right? So let's take this continuum. AI can be a tool, AI can be a replacement. It can happen quickly or it can take time, right? There's a time dimension. In fact, there was a hedge fund that basically blew up because it made a very specific bet, right? Situational awareness, and Leo Aschenbrenner, because he assumed AI's big-time disruption is going to happen in the next 2 years. So I said, okay, I am agnostic about this. I don't know enough about the space. Maybe AI will be a tool, it'll be a replacement, maybe it'll happen quick. And what I basically did was looked at the effect of each of the possible combinations. So if you assume that AI is going to replace workers and it's going to be quick, there's going to be near term, there's going to be the costs are going to exceed the revenues, right? You're going to have people losing jobs, and even if they find other jobs, it's not going to happen overnight. Maybe long term this can be good, but with every combination, I've tried to get a sense of, will this be a big effect or a small effect? And you can already see with tools, the effect is much smaller. Why is that? Well, if AI is a tool, why will the market never be 10 trillion? What does it mean when AI is a tool? Companies keep their existing employees and they spend more money on AI, right? We have a problem. It's an economic problem. If you continue to pay employees 12 trillion, and on top of that you pay 10 trillion for the tools, where are you coming up with all this money? These are costs to the company, right? Your revenues are not magic. You're not be able to charge more for groceries and more for your products. The only way you get big total addressable markets for AI is if it becomes a replacement for people. And the problem with AI company CEOs is that is now becoming a politically and socially difficult thing to sell. And I don't blame either the politicians or society for pushing back, because you're threatening my job, my existence. Of course I'm going to push back. Let's talk about industry structure. Generically, if you look at every industry, you got splintered industries where you got dozens and dozens of small players, and consolidated industries where you have 3 or 4 players. And economics set the structure. And one of the potential scenarios, you end up with a winner-take-all structure. This has always been true. In the 20th century, if you look at businesses like power and electricity, they ended up being winner-take-all businesses, even in markets where they were privately owned companies. And the problem with having winner-take-all, you end up with a monopoly. So the way the governments restricted them was they made them regulated monopolies. The way that worked was, if you're a power company, you had a monopoly, but you couldn't set prices. One of the unpleasant things about being a monopoly is nobody likes you. The way you get back at people is you charge them more. It makes you feel better. You don't like me, I'll charge you. But if you're a regulated monopoly, people still hate you, but you don't get to get back at them. So I don't even know why companies want to be regulated monopolies, but it happens. So one of the questions I think we have to address is, how will this AI business, so make your choice on how big the market is going to be. You still have to decide, what will that business look like in steady state? Will there be lots of players? And unfortunately, if you look at what's happened over the last 30 to 40 years across the world, business after business is getting more consolidated. People have, conspiratorial views said this is what's wrong with the world. But there's a reason for that. Let's take an example, right? Advertising, if you go back 30 years, was a hopelessly splintered business. The largest advertising company in the world might have been, let's say, the New York Times, but its market share of the total market was 2%. Why? Because it was restricted by language and by geography. Today, you look at the advertising business, 2 companies control 60% of all of the revenues in the advertising business. Google and Facebook. It's become a concentrated business. Take car service. Pre-ride sharing, largest car service company might have been some guy who owned 20 taxis in New York. Today, you look at Uber and Lyft and Didi, it's become a consolidated business. Business after business, this has been the effect of technology and disruption. So if I were making a prediction here, given the nature of AI companies, I think you're going to get a consolidated business, maybe 4 or 5 companies. I won't even name them because we don't really know. I mean, you're saying, I know they're going to be Anthropic. Do you? We don't know yet, but there will be consolidation, which is good for the values of these companies that win. But remember the big market delusion? You know what that means, right? There are 100 companies started, 90 of them you're going to write off and say, I wish I hadn't done that. The nature of the process. So the industry structure matters. Your business models matter. Again, generically, there are 2 ways this business can evolve. You can go with the Anthropic route, which is to charge high prices, make premium products, and charge 6,000, 8,000, 10,000. Companies, in fact, are worrying about how much they've put restrictions on how much their employees can use AI because you can run up huge bills very quickly in Anthropic. But I don't know whether you noticed, but a few weeks ago, OpenAI announced they were going to cut the prices for their products. You think that makes no sense. I think OpenAI sees a space in it, mass market, much lower margins, much more in revenues. Is one right and the other? They could maybe both right? Maybe there's 20% of the market. So one of the questions we've got to think about is, how will this market play out? Will it be a low margin, primarily a low margin mass market, or will it be a premium product high market? Of course, there are these nightmare scenarios. We end up being a low margin small market. Please, God, don't let that be true, because then you got 1.5 trillion in factory or that you've already spent that's going to be useless. And it's interesting because of a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, this lid got blown over by DeepSeek. If you remember the Chinese, yeah. And for those of you who remember DeepSeek, what DeepSeek did was that it's basically sold AI stuff, but it used old chips and didn't build big data centers. And said, we can get pretty close to what you're selling at OpenAI at 10% of the cost. And it caused a shake-up in the market, and I'll show you what the shake-up looked like, but I think that this is part of the story we've got to keep our eye on. And this is why I think, you see these companies, because they really don't know. If you think they have some secret conduit to knowledge, they don't. They're just as much in the dark right now as you and I are. The only problem is they're spending $1.5 trillion to be in the dark. Hopefully you're not spending $1.5 trillion to be in the dark with them. But I think we need to start to look at the numbers, and not just the bottom line of the revenue growth, because those are going to be not that useful. We've got to look like any business. What are the unit I want Anthropic to go public because I want to see in the prospectus because they talk about 200 billion revenues. Okay, I'm impressed. But if it cost you $220 billion to deliver that 200 billion revenues, I'm not that impressed yet, right? Because unit economics are not working out. So look at the gross margins as these companies start to evolve, because that's where you're going to start to get a sense of the unit economics. In fact, this was from a post I did of breaking down financial statements, looking for clues on business models. The tax drag, the unit economics, the economies of scale. Because, I think accounting has completely led us off track on these things, because accountants really don't think of business economics. They think of ratios. They divide one number by another number, they call it a ratio, and you have 200 different ratios. But I think ultimately the reason we look at financials is to get clues about business economics, and I'd watch it. What about moats? Again, we can't reinvent the wheel. We know what creates moats, and the question we've got to ask is, which of these moats is most likely to show up in AI? Is it brand name? Well, maybe you'd pay more for a Claude agent than another agent that does the same thing. But I don't think it's going to be like consumer products. It's not brand name. I think the real competitive advantage will come from a company that figures out how to lower the cost of delivering AI products and services faster than other companies. And I'm not that hopeful that it'll be Anthropic. Anthropic seems to be so focused on neat, high-end stuff that there's very little talk of what does it cost you to make this. So it'll be interesting again. Maybe this will come from China, and that is a disruption that you got to factor in here as well. Maybe the Chinese are working on just low-cost, less premium products, and that might determine the end economics in this business. So, as I said, DeepSeek kind of opened the door to disruption before the business even got started, right? And it's kind of hanging out there saying, because it was, for those of you who don't know the history of DeepSeek, this software engineer, and this, you can debate about whether he stole the NVIDIA chips to get started, as you know, but he came out with a product that does 90% of what OpenAI with ChatGPT and Anthropic were doing at a fraction of a cost. without building the architecture. They said, you're building the expensive factory. I have a little storefront here where I'm churning out stuff that looks very much like the stuff from your factory. Okay? And when DeepSeek came out, the effect in just a few days on all of the big AI architecture companies was pretty decisive. I mean, it lost billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars in value. It kind of faded because of issues with, you worried about privacy and what the, and there was NVIDIA sued them for using the chips. So the story has become murky. But trust me, the Chinese investment in AI is working on a DeepSeek-like structure of delivering cheaper products. Perhaps not as sophisticated as Anthropic's, but at a fraction of a cost. So that'll be worth watching as this head. Because when the DeepSeek story came out, I actually revalued NVIDIA and said, this is where disruption will show up in your story. Your growth will get lower, your margins are going to come under pressure. And that's going to be a very real possibility with these AI companies. So if you pay $2 trillion for Anthropic, you're looking over your shoulder saying, please God, don't let there be a DeepSeek version of Anthropic out there, because that will start a meltdown in value. So the bottom line is, even if you're an optimist on AI, the pathway to get there is long and filled with potholes, which is one reason I didn't get what Leo Aschenbrenner did with his hedge fund. So does anybody know the details of his hedge fund? What did he do? He said he wrote, first, to show you the times we live in, the hedge fund was born out of a post. This is almost as bad as WeWork being born out of a TEDx talk, which is where Adam Newman made it. So Leo Aschenbrenner gets into Columbia at the age of 15, graduates with a degree in economics at 19, gets hired at Oxford. So is he a smart guy? Obviously. So let's concede that. He goes to work in OpenAI. He gets fired for leaking data. He claims he didn't leak it. So we can leave that murky. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding of monumental proportions. And then at the age of 24, after he gets fired by OpenAI, he writes this piece called Situational Awareness. And that he lays out the case that not only will AI be tremendously disruptive, but it'll happen really fast. I think he set a target of, it'll happen by 2027 or 2028. Then he created a hedge fund. So guess what he bought in the hedge fund? He was long all of the AI architecture companies, not the big ones, not the hyperscalers, but the smaller, the smaller players that feed into AI architecture. He bought those. And if AI is going to be a major disruptive force, what's going to happen? There are going to be sectors that are going to be hurt by it. So he sold short on software companies and tech companies. So by itself, if he'd stopped right there, it's a macro story. Think of this as Cathy Wood with maybe a brain. Basically, he's got a macro story. He's a smart guy. And I could have gone along with it. But then what did he do in addition to making those long and short bets? He borrowed 400%. And now we have a problem. So in fact, the post I wrote at the start of this week was, is it ever okay to borrow 400% on an investment? Yes, if you're absolutely certain. In fact, in arbitrage, remember options and futures arbitrage? What do? You borrow 100%. Why do you get away with it? Because you've got a guaranteed cash flow. So I wrote a piece on conviction. If you have absolute conviction, of course you can borrow money and concentrate. But here was my problem with Leo's strategy. He had actions that suggested close to absolute conviction. But his story is an AI story. No matter how smart you are, that story is not a story without a great deal of uncertainty. Mismatching investment conviction with investment actions never ends well. In the case of situational awareness, in 4 weeks, he was up 460%. So, clearly he delivered when things were good, momentum helped him. But in 1 month, he effectively not just wiped out 2/3 of his public equity position, but because of the leverage, he had to sell the entire position to Citadel at a 10% discount. The fund effectively shut down. You can tell me you're an optimist story and you can tell me you can identify the winners, but if you have any degree of humility, you got to say, this is what I think, but it could be wrong. In which case, act that way, right? Don't borrow money. Don't concentrate in 3 companies. Do the things you should be doing if you're uncertain. And that's what I would push back. I'm going to pass on the NVIDIA because NVIDIA is a company I bought in 2018. You think, what remarkable foresight. You saw AI coming? I had no idea what AI even was. I got lucky. NVIDIA had a bad year in 2018. It looked undervalued just as a chip company. And I bought it. It was $1.80 on a split adjusted basis when I bought it. Then I got lucky. This AI thing came out of nowhere. NVIDIA took off and it kept hitting new milestones, 100, 120. And if you're in investing, you're supposed to buy things that are undervalued. What's the flip side of that? This buy and hold forever. I've never understood. How can you be a value investor and tell me with a straight face that you just buy and hold forever? Because you're missing half the equation, right? You should be selling when it's overvalued. So every 3 months between 2022 and 2025, I kept revaluing NVIDIA. And I found it get more and more overvalued, and to put a gun to my head, but I put a gun to my own head and I started selling pieces. I sold my last piece towards the end. But this is a tangible AI story, right? Because any company that's selling into the architecture, you know it's going to make money. Even if the bubble blows up, that's a great thing. You can't return the NVIDIA chip saying, hey guys, you sold us these chips, we don't need them, you collected the revenues, this is one and done. You know? So if you get a chance, look at the NVIDIA valuation because it kind of gives you a classic AI story. But as you know, but I think it's no matter how great you think NVIDIA is a company, it can be an awesome company, but it can be a terrible investment. So, and I have a matrix that I use when I think about investing. On one side of the matrix, it's what you perceive a company to be, and you can put it from awesome to abysmal. On the other side, you have what the market thinks about the company. And you're looking for mismatches. If you think your company is awesome and the market thinks it's awesome, you're not going to make money. It's already priced in. Your best case scenario is you think a company is awesome and the market thinks it's abysmal. I've almost never had that happen. But the nature of investing is not finding good companies or bad companies, it's finding companies where your perception, the market's perception are different. Tomorrow I'm doing a session on narrative and numbers at Inspire. And one of the companies I'm going to value is Natura. I valued Natura 10 years ago, a high-flying, high-growth, global company. The Natura of today is not high-flying. It's lost half its revenues over the last 5 years. Not profitable. Its margins have dropped to 6%, operating margins down to 6%. And it's on the precipice, right? It's not a great company. It might, I don't know whether I put it in very bad or abysmal, but it's falling somewhere towards the bottom. You're saying, but then why value it? What's the point? The market is not excited about the company either, right? I valued it, I think, at about $8.28. The market price is $8.13. We both agree it's, I think, very bad or abysmal. But I'm going to keep an eye on the company because there could potentially be a mismatch and it might show up. But as you look at these AI companies, keep that in mind. Don't fall for the fluff. Dario Amodei is an amazing manager, and Anthropic is a great company. All of that might be true, but that doesn't make it a great investment if you got to pay $2 trillion. I love SpaceX as a company. I'll be quite honest. I love it as a company because it's truly a futuristic company. I just didn't like it. at 1.8 trillion. I valued at 1.3 trillion, $100 per share, went public at 135. You know how many emails I got in the week after it went public saying, are you sorry now? Because it went to 200 plus. Then it went back to 110. I didn't fall for the bait and send them an email saying, are you sorry now? No. But I think the reality here is, I like the company, but 2 trillion, just way too high a price. So it'll be interesting if it drops to 80, whether I... So I want to talk a little bit. I'm way out of time, am I not? Okay, I can keep going about 30 minutes? Okay. As I said, I teach my classes now entirely in the spring of each year. Now, until 10 years ago, I lived in the New York area. That's what we say because we live in New Jersey. Nobody wants to say, I live in New Jersey. You say, I live in the New York area, right? I feel really bad for New Jersey. It's like you live in this reflected pain. Nobody wants to admit. You know, the New York Giants play in New Jersey, but they don't call themselves the New Jersey Giants. So I lived in the vicinity of the city, and I took the train in. And 10 years ago, I decided to move to California. Why? Because my wife's from California, and I always promised her we're going back home for her. I like the outdoors, and I said, okay. My fourth kid went off to college, and same year we took off the other. And as I was leaving, I went to NYU and said, look, guys, I'm going to California. I'll continue to teach, and here are my conditions. I can't teach fall and spring because that means I've got to be flying out to New York 8 months of the year. I'll teach on the condition that I teach only in one semester. You can give me 3 classes, which is my normal load. And I'll teach only on Monday and Wednesday. When you make a threat, what makes it work is they know you'll carry it through. And it was clear, look, if you don't want it, I'm okay. I'm okay retiring. I'm okay just hanging out. And they came back and said, oh, no, we're okay with this. We'll even throw in an apartment for you to come and stay. I said, okay. So every spring, I've been going back to teach my classes. And this was in 2024, the spring class, 11th, it's a 15-week semester. In the 11th week, I get a call from a friend of mine. His name is Aswath Damodaran. He teaches machine learning at NYU. He got his PhD at Carnegie Mellon in 1984. If you get a chance, go check his Vita/resume out. You know what the title of his thesis in 1984 was? Artificial intelligence. It wasn't called AI yet. So that tells you this is something that's been building for a while. And he knows he's forgotten more about AI than I will ever learn. So he calls me and says, Aswath, we built a Damodaran bot. I said, a what? He said, a Damodaran bot. I said, what's a Damodaran bot? He said, it's an AI entity that has read everything you've ever written. And I have this nasty habit. When I write something, it's out there. So it's read every blog post, every book. He said, it's watched every YouTube video you've ever made. And since I do all my lectures are on there, it's 15 years of classes, every blog post, every blog video. It said it's looked at every valuation you've made public. When I valued SpaceX, for instance, I throw the Excel spreadsheet. I'm getting more and more nervous about where this is going. And I said, so? He said, it's ready. I said, ready to do what? To value companies. I said, what exactly do you want me to do? He said, can you ask? Every student in my class has to value a company. They pick a company, whatever company they want. They can pick Natura if they want. They can pick, Godot if they want. They can pick whatever company they want. He said, can you get 20 volunteers from your class, and when they value a company for their final project, which is what I grade them on, I'll get the bot to value the company as well, and I want you to compare the two and tell me how the bot does. I very reluctantly said yes, because I was afraid of either end outcome. Let me explain. Let's say the bot does better than every one of my 20 students. What does it tell me? Why are you wasting your time teaching this class, right? The bot can be. At the other extreme, if the bot does worse than every one of my 20 students, I have a different problem, which is The reason I put all my stuff online is to teach people how to do valuation. And here's a bot that's read everything I've ever written, watched and can't value companies. In which case, it's time for me to hang up my hat and say, I can't teach this subject, time to move on. The experiment is still ongoing. Every 2 or 3 months, he sends me another company the bot has valued and say, can you grade this as if it's a student paper? Right now, the most recent company it valued is BYD. You familiar with BYD? Chinese. It's a really tough company to value. And he sent me the report, and it's kind of eerie because it writes the way I write, because it's learned from, it puts in graphs like the graphs I would put in. Sometimes it slips up and it might have read a banking valuation somewhere along the way and uses an EBITDA multiple to get terminal value. Say, no, that's not me. But it gets most of it right. And if I had to grade the most recent valuations it's done, it started as a B. It's now up to a B+. It's getting better. And I can't, it does about as well as, because my B+ is the 80th percentile in my class, it's doing about as well as the 80th. This is not just Excel spreadsheet modeling. It actually tells a business story and fills out the rest of the details. So the question is, what next, right? So if you think about this as AI, I started thinking about what is it that bots will be able to do really well, and what are the things they're going to struggle with. Not doesn't mean they can't do it, but do it. So let me give you the divides here. And as I go through these divides, I want you to think about what you do at your job on a daily basis. You don't have to tell me, but be honest with yourselves. Because this is going to tell you how much you should take the AI threat seriously. Much of what we do is mechanical stuff, right? Same thing over. And we do it because that's what being systematic. You go through the steps, you check off boxes. Machines will always be better at doing mechanical stuff than you will. Because machines don't get tired. They don't take a coffee break. They don't chat with the next, the person who works in the next office and gets distracted. Machines are really good at mechanical stuff. And that's always been true. I don't know whether you remember the story of Deep Blue. Deep Blue was an IBM computer that played chess in the 1990s. And it played the grandmasters, the very best chess players in the world, until they refused to play it anymore. You know why? They couldn't beat it. Because the machine had been fed every single chess game played in history. So there wasn't a move you could make that it hadn't seen before and seen the whole thing play out. Chess, in spite of its complexity, is mechanical. Mechanical in terms of steps, but it's mechanical. As opposed to what? Some of the stuff you do is intuitive, right? Where you look at something and say, I've seen something like that before, and this is what it means. I don't know how much of your work is mechanical and how much is this intuitive, but draw a pie chart of what you do. And if 99% of what you do is mechanical, learn how to plumb. It's AI is coming for you, right? It's only a question of time. Is it mechanical or intuitive? The second is what you do at your work, rules-based or principle-based. How many of you do fair value accounting as part of your jobs? Nobody here does it? Okay. So if you work at Ernst & Young or Deloitte, nobody works at any of the accounting firms? The 80% of valuation done at most of the accounting firms is fair value accounting. What do you have to do? You got to take the balance sheet and value assets based on accounting rules. And if you get a chance, pick up the IFRS book. Don't try to read it because you will commit suicide. But what's the accountant's reaction to a problem? Write more rules, more rules. It's incredibly rule-based. Fair value accounting, I can guarantee you, AI will do better than Ernst & Young and Deloitte because it'll follow every rule to, it's going to be perfectly rule-based. As opposed to what? As opposed to being principle-based. Principle-based, there are 3-4 principles. You got to extract the rules from the principles. So rather than tell you what the tax rate you should use in valuation is, you go back to first principle. What am I trying to estimate? And you use that to extract the rule. AI will have a tougher time replicating what you do. Third, subjective versus objective. In my classes, for better or worse, about half my class is composed of recovering engineers, recovering mathematicians, recovering scientists who come back to business school because they don't make much money as engineers and scientists and mathematicians. And I value companies in class. Real companies. I've never valued an XYZ widget company. So I'll take a Tesla, and I'll go through the valuation. And about a third of the way through, a recovering engineer will put up his hand. And I've estimated the revenue growth for the next 5 years. He'll put up his hand and say, but that is so subjective. And when an engineer uses the word subjective, it's not a compliment. Basically, he's saying, you just made that stuff up, didn't you? Where's the equation that gave you the 27% growth? Without the equation, I don't believe you. That's the nature of being objective. There's some equation. You got the growth. And that's why we use return on invested capital times reinvestment rate. Engineers like that. I see it. It's an equation. Those two numbers multiplied together. The fact that it works only if your margins are stable and only for about 10% of companies is completely not, it doesn't matter because it's giving them an equation. The equation gives a number. And my reaction is be glad it's subjective. If every number in your valuation is objective, like I said, ChatGPT, can you value this company for me? Because the equations a machine can do, right? And finally, if you do any kind of valuation, this might even be in the CFA mission, that you are objective professionals and that you will let the science drive. Stop lying. If you do valuations for a living and somebody pays you, of course you're going to be biased. You know what the CFA gives you? It gives you better ways of hiding the bias. Okay? You don't do it in an obvious way. You don't use an EBITDA multiple of 50 to get a terminal value. That's too obvious. So I'll teach you ways you can hide the bias that nobody can find the bias. The sad truth in much of valuation practice is the value gets set first and the valuation. I call these kabuki dance valuations. You have the end number and you go through the dance. Look at the cash flow, look at the growth, look at the reinvestment rate, look at the cost of capital. And while I'm looking at all of that, you've already made up your mind what the end number is going to be. Here's the problem. If you're that biased and ChatGPT notices the bias, guess what it's going to do? It's going to replicate the bias. It's going to say, you want to get this high number because your client is doing an acquisition and needs a fairness opinion. I get it. I'll create the high number for you. And you've taught me how to hide the stuff. I've read you don't have to teach it. You've read the CFA curriculum, so it does it for you. It'll do a really good job of hiding bias and delivering the number you wanted. Now, I told you SpaceX, the offering price was set at $135. You know what the consensus target price from investment bankers was when the offering price was set at $135? It was $165. Over the next 3 weeks, SpaceX went to $200. You know what the target price, the consensus target price across investment banks was? When it went to 200, it was 230. Then the price dropped to 110, and I was checking the target price. You know what the consensus target price was? It was about 140. I'm noticing a pattern here. Your target price always seems to be whatever the current price is plus $30. Now, you might have some story you tell about how this is happening, but if ChatGPT is watching, say, I see what you guys are doing. I can do target prices too. I'll take the market price plus add. You always do 20%. I'll do the 20%. And I notice you play with the multiples. You try this EV to EBITDA or EV to sales. You find the multiple that best gives you that price. I can find a multiple for you that does it. It's going to turn out some really professional-looking sell-side equity research reports that hit your target prices, right? So if you're biased, you're more open to disruption than if you're actually objective. So I've been thinking about the fact that I have bots looking over my shoulder, and I'm thinking about what I can do to keep the bots away. Now, this might be purely delusional, and I might be holding on to straws, and it's over for me. My bots are going to take over. But there are 4 things that I think give me an advantage. The first is people often ask me, what research do you do? And I say, I don't do research. I dabble. What does that mean? I pick something that interests me this week. It could be Leo Aschenbrenner's hedge fund. I talk about it. Next week, it might be, should FIFA have sold the money rights? It's a financial question. Why? Because I'm fascinated. I actually, when Mbappe turned down the $960 million to go play in the Middle East, I actually wrote a piece on what's a soccer player worth to a team, from a value. So I tend to jump from topic to topic. I'm a dabbler. And over the last 40 years, dabblers have been at a disadvantage. Generalists have been replaced by specialists. If any of you have recently been to a doctor, there's no such thing as a doctor anymore, right? You have a knee problem, there's a knee doctor. You go to the knee doctor, it turns out with torn meniscus, there's a specialist in meniscus. That's all he does. Every discipline has become more specialized. There was a reason for it. There's so much content within each sub-discipline that nobody can match. So you basically had to be, and that was an advantage for a long time. And that advantage is gone. Because AI can take all of that content, learn it, not just read it, but read it in 5 minutes. So if you gave Anthropic permission, it'll read everything about meniscus in 5 minutes and have exactly the same amount of knowledge as that meniscus specialist. So if you think about one of the things that I think we've lost over the last 4 decades, we've lost people who play across disciplines. I mean, I'll give you a personal example. When I used to walk in investment banks in the early 1980s, you could talk to an investment banker about stocks, but then you could ask him about bonds, and he might not be as well, but he had an idea, which is what I think about is happening in the bond market. He could talk macro, he could talk about the theater. You now walk into a bank, you talk to a banker, the guy knows everything there is to know about mortgage-backed securities, but that's it. You stray from that, I don't know, I'm just a mortgage-backed securities guy. What a depressing life you must live. Right? But that specialization basically is a problem with AI. AI is an easier time disrupting specialists than generalists. It came to me when I was with my family about 10 years ago in Florence. We went on vacation. If you've been to Florence, you've seen the Duomo, right? Second largest freestanding dome in the world when it was built. What was the largest? Pantheon in Rome. The only problem is barbarians had invaded, the plans were gone, nobody had any idea how to build a large freestanding dome. So my family decides to take a gelato break. Middle of the summer, Florence, it's hot, they take a gelato break. I'm too lazy to take a gelato break. I sit on the side and I start reading a brochure about the Duomo. Amazing architectural accomplishment. And it's built by a guy called Brunelleschi. He oversaw the construction. Must have been a great architect, right? No, he was actually an artist. He was one of the people who carved one of the doors. He knew nothing about architecture, but he taught himself enough architecture, enough construction, enough physics to be able to build the second largest dome in the world. And there's a reason we use the term Renaissance man, right? Leonardo da Vinci, was he an artist? Was he a scientist? Was he a visionary? He was all of them. But especially over the last century, we've removed Renaissance people from the mix. They're not that valuable. They don't know enough about anything. And here there's some very interesting stuff that's coming out about generalists versus specialists. Have any of you read Phil Tetlock's books on forecasting? He's a book about the hedgehog and what's the other word? The turtle and the hedgehog. Basically, it's between generalists and specialists. And what he runs is tests. He asks macroeconomists, what do you think will happen to the US economy over the next 2 years? So he takes 10 macroeconomists, he asks the question. Then he takes 10 people who are not macroeconomists, but who are well-read, who have a bunch of different interests across areas. He says, what do you think will happen to the US economy? And he runs this test in area after area. In every single test, guess who comes up with a better forecast? It's a generalist. It's a scary thought. If you're paying lots of money for a macroeconomist, and just fire them. They're really not doing much, right? And why is that a surprise? If you haven't eaten yet and you're going to pick a restaurant to eat at 10 o'clock tonight and you're from somewhere else, how do you pick a restaurant? You look for Yelp reviews, crowd judgment. You get home at 11:30, you turn on Netflix, there are like 5,000 new shows, most of them are bad. You say, what do I watch tonight? You look at Rotten Tomatoes. Crowd judgment in area after area. And that's basically the advantage that generalists bring, is they might not know much about this, as much about the topic as a specialist, but they have perspective. I think one of the problems in COVID is we let COVID specialists determine. Now, they should have had some input, but the problem when you're a specialist is you have no perspective. You're so immersed in that area that you're incapable of stepping back and saying, is this the right thing to do? So if you're a specialist, try to be more general. In other words, when you go for lunch, don't hang out with the 3 other people you always work with. Go to that other table, or those people you've never liked, working in that department you think is a complete waste of time. Spend some time with them, kind of get that generalist plan. Second, and I won't do it because this is the narrative in numbers, if what I did was financial modeling, which unfortunately is what a lot of valuation has become. You know what financial modeling is, right? You build big Excel spreadsheets. Banking valuations are almost all financial models. They're not valuations. 600 line items, 20 worksheets. You are begging to be replaced. Okay. I am thankful that I came to the recognition early on of the importance of connecting stories to numbers. That bot that I talked about, it's trying with the story, but you can see the numbers part comes much more easily to it. The story part, it trips up sometimes because it's not, stories wander off. They're distractions, the things you do that don't come as easily to a linear thinker, which is what a machine does. Right? So, I know it says time is up, time is up, time is up. I'm almost there, right? So if you can think about a good valuation as a bridge between stories, and is there something else that comes in after us? No, okay, then I'll keep going. You can, if you're tired, you want to check your Yelp review and go to a restaurant, by all means do so, right? But I think that the more you can tie storytelling to valuation, the more difficult, not impossible, it becomes for AI to do what you do. I'm almost there. A few years ago, in a teaching magazine, I wrote a piece called The Google Curse. And what I was talking about is, at that time, if you had a question and you wanted to answer it, what do? You went on Google and said, what do I do? Today, it's even easier, right? You can ask your smartwatch, ChatGPT would, in fact, when I was in Bogota the first day, at 7:45 in the morning, the fire alarm started to go off in the Hilton that I was in. I was on the 12th floor, and everybody had to evacuate because there was an earthquake. So I come out of the building, I call my wife because I know the story is going to be everywhere. No. I said, look, there was an earthquake, but I'm still standing. She said, what hotel are you at? I said, why does that matter? She said, hotels built after 2000, because she's already checking online. Hotels built after 2009 in Bogota have had to follow the earthquake restrictions. I said, I don't know, it's a Hilton Bogota. She goes on Google search. When was the Hilton Bogota built? 2011. It's amazing that we can pull this information. That's the good side of the Google curse. But there's a bad side, right? You're sitting down to value a company, you're trying to decide what tax rate to use. Effective tax rate, marginal tax rate, weighted average of the two. You go on Google search and say, what tax rate should I use in computing after-tax cash flows and valuation? You will get an answer, perhaps from one of my books, saves you time, but you lost an opportunity. Why? Because I didn't know I had to reason my way to an answer, and you could, this isn't rocket science. I'm not Einstein. You could reason your way to the same answer, and the advantage of you reasoning your way to not only will it stick, but you're developing a framework on the next question you got to ask. My problem with the world is it's getting so easy to look up answers that people don't want to reason. You're saying, so what? Reasoning is a muscle. If you don't use it, it gets flabby. And if you keep not using it, evolution is a nasty beast. It says, you guys don't seem to be using your reasoning muscle. Remember the story of the dodo birds? They had wings, but they couldn't fly anymore because the wings had become more and more non-functional. Why? Because they never flew. And after a while, nature said, why am I giving you wings? You never fly. So I'm just going to make the wings ornamental. What if 80 years from now, when babies are born, they've lost the reasoning muscle? Where do you live? Let me check Google. Your reasoning muscle is completely gone. It terrifies me for my grandchildren. They're 8, 6, and 1 because they're going to live in a world where the answers are going to be at their fingertips. So if you have kids or you have grandkids, work on that reasoning with them. They'll get impatient with you. Say, I asked you a question, just give me the answer, But taking those extra minutes to reason, I think, is critical because if you can reason it out, that's going to give you an edge over a machine. That's the skill set. And finally, you know what they say about an idle mind, right? It's a devil's workshop. I hope it's not true because I spend a lot of my day. I don't read very much. So when people ask, what are you reading? I say, I read a serial killer story. I'm not reading deep intellectual, philosophical investing tomes. I don't listen to podcasts. I have no patience. So you think, what do you do all day? I daydream. Nothing. I just let my And while that might seem like a waste of time, in fact, we're often told, don't waste your time, we tell our kids, don't daydream, right? I think that some of the greatest inventions in humankind have come from people. Can you imagine a guy sitting under an apple tree? Apple falls on his head, and he comes up with the laws of gravity. How did you go from an apple falling on your head to the laws of gravity? Guy sitting in his bathtub, water spills out, he jumps out of the bathtub naked, runs through town, says, Eureka, Eureka. This is Archimedes. The human brain is magical in connecting disconnected things. So I'm going to end with a story that kind of illustrates perhaps how weird I am, but I'm okay with that. So about 2 years ago, I am in San Diego, back from New York for the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday portion of my week. I think it was a Friday. I get up in the morning, I wake up really early, 6 o'clock, I check my emails. And there's an email from somebody in Iceland, somebody I don't know, but who reads my blog post, and he says, I'm valuing an Icelandic company. It's called the Blue Lagoon. For those of you who've been to Iceland, it's a legendary spa. And Iceland's been around, makes a lot of money, is always full. And he says, I'm running into a valuation problem. A volcano has erupted 100 miles away, and the lava is flowing in the general direction of the Blue Lagoon. And I'm trying to factor lava risk into valuation. And I can't find it. I've looked at your book. I've done a Google search. Is there anything in the CFA curriculum about lava risk? I don't think so. Right? He says, what should I do? Who has the time for this at 6 o'clock in the morning? So I turn off my computer. My dog's scratching at the door. He wants to go out. So I take the dog out. As I said, I live in San Diego, and it's become a haven for people who smoke cannabis 24 hours a day. So when you go for a walk, you get high, your dog gets high. Maybe that has something to do with the rest of the story, but I'm walking with the dog, and a key part of the story is that I did not take my phone with me. So I'm walking with the dog. The dog takes forever to do its business, and I'm thinking about lava risk. And while I'm thinking about lava risk, I think about fossil fuel companies. If you listen to COP, 28? Which COP was it? This circus that moves around the world, usually to some oil-producing part of the world, and then tells the world is going to end in 20 years, and fossil fuels are Satan's gift to humankind. Fossil fuel companies should be priced at much lower prices now than they were 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. They're actually trading at all-time highs. So, how can this be? If there's catastrophic climate risk to face and fossil fuels are going to get phased out, how come it's not in the pricing? I'm still on my walk thinking about fossil fuels when I think about this company called 23andMe. It's a company that you can send your saliva samples to, and they do a genetic test, and they tell you about, what your ancestors were, what part of the world I think they make up stuff, but people like that made up stuff. And about 3 years ago, they had a catastrophic event. Somebody hacked into their computer and got the data on all 6.5 million customers on their DNA and all the rest of the stuff. The company actually went bankrupt. Catastrophic risk consequence. And while I'm thinking of all of this stuff, I remember that my house is 2 blocks from the Pacific Ocean, and one of the worst earthquake faults in the world. On any given day, I'm one tsunami or one earthquake away from not having a house at all. And then I remember how much I paid for my house, and so what was I thinking? What do they have in common? Catastrophic risk, we're not factoring it into value, right? It's a long walk. And so while I'm still in the walk, I think about the Mad Max movies. I told you I have a weird mind, it jumps around. Have you ever watched the Mad Max movies? If you watch the movies, how often during those movies do people talk about their portfolios? Never, right? Why? You're trying to survive. If you're worried about oceans rising 5 feet, your portfolio is the last thing in the universe you should be worrying about. There are far bigger things that are going to happen to you. Here's what we do as human beings. We take catastrophic risk, we set it to the side, we don't factor it into value, because if it happens, you don't care about the fact that NVIDIA will be worth 50% less or 100% less. Because with that catastrophe, you're talking about something so huge that you don't care. So I came back from the walk and I wrote a post on catastrophic risk. It's on my blog, but it came from the fact that I was 40 minutes out there with no phone in my hand and a wandering mind. Now, if I didn't if I believed in conspiracies, you would think tech companies have been conspiring for 30 years to make us easier to replace with AI. Now, I'm going to take my flight back tomorrow to go back to the US. I'm sure some of you are flying elsewhere. When you get to the gate, here's what I'd like you to do. Look around you at all of the other people. There might be a couple of people who are sleeping, but whoever's not sleeping, what are they doing? They're checking their device. Why? By this Facebook post, this is the end of the world if you don't read. Can you imagine if Newton had a smartphone when he was sitting under the apple tree? The apple fell on his head. He said, I'm reading this really good, this TikTok video I'm watching. Stupid apple, let me throw it to the side. You'd have no laws of gravity. We're filling every vacant moment of the day with stuff. And that's not good. We need to have more idle time. Easier said than done, right? Because, with again, if you think about, your kids, this is already almost programmed in. If you have nothing to do, pull out your smartphone and fill in the time, because sitting and daydreaming is almost foreign to them. They've never done it in their lives because they've always had a device in their hand. And for me, that's, So you're saying, what if none of this stuff is likely to happen? You heard of Pascal's wager? Pascal was a French mathematician. And 200 years ago, he said, should I believe in God? Now, normally, if you say, should I believe in God, what do? You visit your priest and you try to get convinced. But Pascal was a mathematician. You know how he convinced himself that it's better to believe in God? He drew a matrix where he said on one side, he said, either I believe in God or I don't. And on the other side, either God exists or he doesn't. Let's look at the 4 quadrants. If you believe in God and God exists, what do you get? Heaven. Plus infinity, right? If you don't believe in God and God exists, then you get hell. Minus infinity. Now you see why religions have to create hells. Because without the minus infinity, it's tougher to get people to believe in God. Plus infinity, minus infinity. And the rest is, if you believe in God and He doesn't exist, you have to do a few things like follow the 10 commandments. You can get away. You don't have to kill your neighbor. Is that one of the commandments? Whatever the commandments are, I can avoid that. But there's mild sacrifice, but you can live with that. I'd like you to think about AI the same way. So you either believe AI is going to be the big disruptive threat. It could come after your job, or it isn't. And the truth is, it can either be a big disruptive threat or nothing. So let's say that it's for real, and you prepare. At least you're ready. Let's say it's not there, and you prepare. You're saying, why did I waste my time? Because it'll make you better at whatever job you're doing. So even if you don't think this is imminent, act like it is. Now that's why I said, act like there's a bot looking over your shoulder and ask yourself, what can I do that my bot cannot do? It'll make you better at whatever you do, whatever your job is. And that's the end game. Okay? So I think this is something we're all going to have to live through over the next 10 years. And our children will definitely face when they get older. So I think it's something we have to start thinking about. How do we teach? I think everything from how we teach kids in school, because for a long time we taught them content, right? If you had an hour on science, you went through the law of gravity, you made them memorize the equations. There's no advantage to that. Content is going to be at your fingertips. You need to get them to reason more, to think on their own, to trust their imagination, have a wandering mind. And it's not easy because it's nice for you to give them a device. Watch the iPad, right? I've TikToks to watch on my own phone. You do your TikToks, I'll do my TikToks. We're all doing TikToks, so, it's work, but I think it's work that we all need to do because I think that is the real threat of AI, is that, basically be more human. And I think over the last 20 or 30 years, we've lost the things that make us human, the kinds of interactions we used to have, because you were stuck in a bank line 30 years ago. What did you do while you were in line? You had no phone to check, no news to have, you couldn't check your stocks. You either had to do stupid things like converse with the person in front of you, say, how's your life going? Or you daydreamed, you thought about, that's what we're starting to lose, is those spaces which made us human. So I've run, 30 minutes. The time is up. It's been up for a long time. So time is truly up. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Everyone is here, so you see that people really value what you brought. And I'd like to invite Luis Vital, who is our board member. So we'll have, I think, like 20 minutes of Q&A. Yeah, roughly that. And he will explain how this will work. So please feel free to shoot questions, and I hope we end up on a very high note. Thank you.
Professor, thank you for such an insightful presentation. I'm sure everyone here loved the presentation, the discussion, your time sharing it with us. So for this Q&A session, you have a QR code here that you can scan it and send questions to me. And I will try to, over the next 20 minutes, to ask some questions. In case you don't do that, I have my own questions that I prepared with ChatGPT. I did that myself. But
and I have my ChatGPT, which will answer the questions as well.
We can do that on. But you mentioned a story I would like to bring, that, there was this story that supposedly some AI set for the CFA exam passed all 3 levels in the very first attempt, with scores better than most of us in this room. But still, we all have our works yet. And judging by this room, I think most of us still have our works. And I would say that we've discussed how the technology is evolving and how jobs get endangered, I would say. But I was going to ask you, what would be your piece of advice for those guys here to work as they had the bottle right behind their ears? And part of it was answered in this discussion, right? Reasoning out, let your mind wander. And before all our members here go to ChatGPT to find out how to do that, do you have some tips out of ChatGPT we can...
See, I'm going to direct my advice to the CFA itself. CFA's had a good run, right? 30 years. And if you think about the success of the program, I did the keynote speech in 1992 for the CFA. It was a young organization, almost entirely US-based. I think it had 3,000 members overall, and half of them were at that meeting, and I gave the keynote. And I've seen the organization grow geographically in terms of numbers. But the problem with the CFA is, to keep the CFA valuable, what do they need to do? They need to fail about 2/3 of the people. I mean, yesterday we were talking about statistics. It was estimated that if you take all 3, for every 100 people who start on the CFA, you end up with about 15 who actually finish all 3 levels. Understand? The question is, are the 15 you're ending up with the 15 that you're going to turn out as if these people understand how to do financial analysis better than the other 85, right? That's what you want it to be. Unfortunately, the way the CFA has evolved is the way they separate the wheat from the chaff, the 15 from the 85, for better or worse, has become an endurance test. Those of you who've taken all 3 levels, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? I mean, I'd say this might be a little unfair, but what the CFA says, read these 7,500 pages of stuff. And then in the exam, it's a closed book exam. What do they ask you? What was on page 2,555? And if you get it, okay, you're good. CFA level 1, right? This is not a great way to separate the wheat from the chaff, because all it does is it separates the people who either don't have the time or are reading, they have dyslexia. They can't read 7,500 pages from the people who can. But it's a content-based program, right? Almost everything is about equations and methods and models and approaches. It's not ways of thinking. It's more of, you need to know these 4 models. These are the papers in it. And there was a time when that was valuable. 20 years ago, having that knowledge like that, you didn't have to go look it up in the book. It gave you the show. You were a CFA, you got there faster. Today, how valuable is that? Right? Much of the content is going to be, ChatGPT can do it, Claude, of course, can do it. I actually got a letter about 6 weeks before I came here from a very high-powered legal team that had sued Anthropic for infringement of intellectual property. You're saying, why did you get a letter? Because it turns out they've used all 12 of my books in building their agents, and nobody bothered. If they'd have just asked me, I'd have said, go ahead and use it. I don't care. But they never did, and now I am part of the class action. I didn't even know I was part of the class action. And every book they've used, they've got to pay me $3,000 per book. I don't care about the but it tells you that the bots have read, these agents have read all 12 books, and if you've read only 4, the agent actually knows more about my writing than you do. You can't win on content. It's got to be on something else you bring to the table. And that something else is, you have to find out what that something else is for you. And that's basically what the CFA should be trying to orient its program towards. What are the things that you do as human beings that a machine can't do as easily? And the problem is, it's more difficult to write material that does that. It's easier to write a material, and this is how you get growth from reinvestment rate and return on capital, than is to talk about the origins of growth and why growth fades. And it's also much more difficult to grade exams built around how well do you think, right? Because they can't be a closed book. They have to be an open book. And the people grading you actually have to understand the process as well. So I'm not upbeat that they will do it, but I worry about any certification-based program that's entirely content-based, where you're not getting much. I mean, maybe that will come from creating more interaction among people taking the CFA exam and saying, come up with something original. No, I think the CFA case challenge, I think, is a nice way to create that. So, long answer, I think that would be my advice to people, is focus less on content and focus more on thought processes.
I have another question here. Your delusion diagram shows overconfident VCs and overconfident entrepreneurs too. But it says that in AI, companies like Microsoft and Google are still leading at some level. And does that change the delusion, or just more overconfidence is going to big tech balance sheets?
Can a $3 trillion company be overconfident? Yeah, In fact, if you're successful, the longer you are successful, the more you feed the overconfidence bug, right? I mean, Jensen Huang, if not only is NVIDIA worth close to 5 trillion, but what's everybody around him telling him? You're amazing. You're great. And he strikes me as a pretty humble guy to begin with. People keep telling you, you're amazing, you're great, you don't make mistakes. You're like Julius Caesar in the Shakespeare. Remember the first time they said, you should be king? He said, no, I'm not worthy. Second time, no, I'm not worthy. Third time, okay, put it on my head and I'll be king, right? It becomes really difficult with success to not let it go to your head. Satya Nadella probably started off as a much more humble CEO than he is today. The nature of how we reward people and push it up the ranks rewards overconfidence. Overconfident people don't fail. They get to the top, they become presidents, they become prime ministers, they become CEOs of companies. This is not a fair world. Being overconfident is viewed as being assertive, make decisions, you do it quickly, because that's what overconfident people do. So in the world we live in, I think a lot of people at the top who make decisions, the process makes it such that there's a selection bias. When Tim Cook retired at Apple, or announced his retirement, I wrote a post called An Ode to Restraint. Came out of another long walk with my dog. And the reason I wrote that is he is exceptional. Exceptional in what sense? I mean, for 15 years, he's been at the top of what is, for much of that period, the largest market cap company in the world. During much of that period, he's had $300 billion in cash in the company. Can you imagine how many bankers and consultants must be hanging out outside one infinity loop, trying to tell him how amazing he is and how the greatest deal they can do is. And it takes an insane amount of restraint not to do it. Because what is the last big acquisition Apple did? Answer is they've never done one. Beats, that's like petty cash for them, $6 billion, right? And the amount of restraint you have to not go down that path. I mean, I wish we could make movies about restrained CEOs. You're not going to see the Tim Cook movie. It's going to be very boring. It's not like the Steve Jobs movie. You don't write case studies about CEOs who kind of showed restraint. History is written about whom? Conquerors. What the heck are we celebrating Genghis Khan for? The guy was a sociopath who killed tens of millions of people, but he conquered half the world. We do the same thing with CEOs. Unfortunately, I think that those, especially the big companies that have succeeded, the people who run them, even if they started off as humble, it gets more and more difficult not to be overconfident because you've been right in the past.
And we have this very, very interesting question here. It says that unlike the dot-com bubble, price to earnings ratio don't look extreme today, according to the question.
Only if you look at the Mag 5, right? And there are two problems. One is, where do Alphabet and Meta get their earnings? They get it from their advertising business. Each of these companies has a cash cow that won't stop giving, right? And here's the second problem. Your CFAs. What drives value? It's not earnings, it's free cash flow, right? And what's the intermediate item to get from earnings to free cash flow? CapEx. These were companies that for the bulk of their history were able to grow effortlessly. They took a platform, there's no CapEx, no reinvestment. In the last 4 years, these companies have become they have positive earnings. But I think every single one of them last year had negative free cash flows to the firm. That's scary. Maybe they know something we don't, or maybe they're just over-investing. And that's why I think the last year or so, when earnings reports come out from these companies, they beat their earnings numbers, but when they announce their AI capex, the stock price dropped 7%. The market's getting more skeptical about this storyline of trust us, we know what we're doing. They're saying, I don't think I can trust you. You don't know what you're doing. Yeah.
We have a question here on, we'd like to hear your view on how AI may impact in a specific developing nations. Is there a different view?
You are less protected because you get paid less. I mean, that's the reality, right? In $1, it's just because, what did I say Claude Fable was? Claude already has a banking agent they've created, which has been fed everything bankers do. It takes all the bad things bankers do. It knows how to do them, like the 6 times EBITDA to get to the terminal value. It does the little chart or the table at the bottom of the terminal value is a function of 6 times EBITDA, 8 times. I think it's kind of hard-coded into banking spreadsheets, I think. It does that, but it's expensive if you have feed it past deals. So the protection you get is, if you're not paid $250,000, you're paid only $100,000, you're less susceptible to getting disrupted. I mean, that was part of the outsourcing, right? They moved from the US to Mumbai. Now you're moving from Mumbai to an AI. So the question is, will AI be cheaper than the Mumbai analyst, or will it be more expensive? And that's part of the cost question. What will it cost to deliver that banking agent?
And we have another question here. It's not exactly AI, but I see that members got so curious about your stories. And here is, looking back in your whole life, which valuation you'd say you got more wrong and which you got more right? And what caused you to be so wrong? And I would add to that, another question we have here is, what is missing in the Damodaran bot? What, in your view, would make it a perfect bot?
Yeah. You know, it's, we talked about FOMO, right? And how it can do. Have you heard of ROMO? It's an acronym I created. ROMO is regret over missing out. You look back and you say, I wish I'd done this, I wish I'd done that. It's one of the most destructive things in investing, because when you look back and you look at things and you say, you know, you should look back and you say, okay, I screwed up, let me learn. But if you look back and say, I wish I'd done that instead of this. I wish I'd bought Palantir. I wish I'd done, it starts to creep into your investment process. So when I look back, I almost never look back and say, I wish I'd bought, Amazon in 1999 and sold it in 2000, because that's, that and $2 will get me a cup of coffee. So I try not to look back at my past valuations looking for what would I have done differently. I look for general lessons that I can use to make my next value. Now, it's a Brazilian company, actually. It was one of my classic examples where, because when I make a mistake, I post about it. And the reason I do it is to keep myself honest, because I've discovered in investing, here's the problem. People say something and then something different happens and they act like they never said it in the first place, right? I don't have the luxury, because when I buy something, I write about buying it. So when I sell something at a lower price than I bought it, I think, to keep myself honest, I've got to say, So this was a post I did on Vale in 2014. Title was No Mas, No Mas. And I got a lot of Brazilians emailing me saying, that's Spanish. Here's the Portuguese version. I said, you're missing the point. And it was about my buying Vale in 2012. The price had been beaten up, and I called it my 3C bet when I bought it. That it had been beaten up because the country was in trouble, the currency was in trouble, and the commodity was down. And I said, at least one of these should reverse, right? So I bought Vale, and it turned out that Brazil could find ways to get into trouble and get into even more trouble, so it got into more trouble. The currency melted down even more, and the commodity dropped another 20%. And I said, guys, I screwed up. No mas, no mas. It's from a Roberto Duran boxing match from 25 years ago, where he was fighting, and the guy said, first round, the end of the first round, he throws up his hands, no mas, I give up. So I said, I give up. And then one thing I did learn from the Vale valuation, one thing that got me into trouble was I based my valuation on trailing 12-month numbers, which is what, And the problem with commodity companies is when commodity prices drop, they don't show up right away. It takes a while to find its way into your numbers. I didn't factor that in. So ever since when I value a commodity company, I no longer use trailing 12 months if the commodity prices change. I restate the numbers. So if you're valuing an oil company, and last year the average oil price was 100, it's now 60, you better not use a trailing 12-month number because you're going to overstate the value. You have to it's added work, but it's my Vale lesson. Right? When I valued Uber the first time, during 2014, I gave it a potential market of about 100 billion because that's what the car service market was then. And I came up with a value of 6 billion, 7 billion. And in that case, Bill Gurley was one of the VCs, Benchmark Capital, who'd invest in Uber, pushed back and he said, you're missing a key element of what technology does. It can change the size of the market. What he was talking about was, by Uber entering car service, it'll attract people who've never used taxi cabs before. No. And I hadn't thought about that. And that, in fact, was the biggest reason why I ended up with that low value, is I missed the fact that it doubled and tripled the size of the car service market elsewhere. I couldn't do much about the Uber thing, right? It was what it was. It wasn't even an investment. It was a private company. But when I valued Airbnb, I factored that in. I said, hotels are 660 billion. It is possible that because of Airbnb, there will be people who travel who might not have gone to a Hilton, or who will travel more, which will increase the size of the market. I didn't go to the 3 trillion they claim, but I did double the size of the market. But it's again a lesson that came. So rather than beat yourself up for being wrong, and I'm reminded, and earlier today I was talking about this, I'm reminded of Roger Federer. We talked about this, giving a graduation speech at Dartmouth. If you get a chance, go on Google and watch it. If you watch it, greatest tennis player of all time, right? And if you're a Djokovic fan, close to the greatest if you want to fight that fight. And he got in front of the graduating students at Dartmouth, and he had actually, I don't know how he did this, he probably hired 5 guys to do it. And he said, over my lifetime playing tennis, I won 53.7% of the points I played. Greatest tennis player ever. Lost 46.3%. Investing is even worse, right? A successful investor, if you beat 50%, you're already a star, because last year, 90% of active investors underperformed an index. This is a game where you're going to lose a lot of the time. And if you beat yourself every time you lose, you won't survive. This is not... So if I screwed up, I average out my mistakes. That's my defense, is, look, I make mistakes. I need to do well on my portfolio, not in individual companies.
Professor, I have another 25 questions here, but I see the time is up, and I
you can
know
ignore it like I did if you want. I don't care.
It's not nice. Yeah. But thank you so much for sharing your time, your insights, your perspective here with us tonight. It's been a privilege to have you here. So please join me in a round of applause to Professor Damodaran.
Thank you.